All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the stream. The date is April 7th, 2020. You love to see it. Week 4, Week 5, sheltering in place. Today we have a special treat for you. We have a Blackwing Lair Warlock Masterclass. I am joined today by two very large brain progress raiders, two Warlocks. We got my man Alive in the building, who I've been a long-time fan of.
How's it going, guys?
How's it going, everybody? Welcome back. And we also got Hellspawn in here, who I just met. I just found out that Alive and I are neighbors, man, which is, well, you know, relatively speaking, which is pretty cool. Small world, man. Hope everybody's staying corona-free. But let me stop talking. Guys, how are you today?
Doing pretty good. I'm looking forward to answering as many questions as possible. Honestly, I've been playing this game for such a long time, and people kind of think they're burdening me by asking questions, but I think nothing is more fun than taking the knowledge that you've learned and spreading it to everyone else. So I'm looking forward to the stream, man.
All is good. Here's a little bit sad weather in Sweden, but shouldn't complain. I mean, Corona times, you can't do much outdoors anyway, so it's all good.
Big true. So you're in Sweden, yeah. It's how I mean, not to derail too much, but how are they pretty substantially affected over there?
I would say so, but I think also Sweden has kind of chosen a different route, and you can have all your political views on that one. But things are not as strict as some other countries been hit as hard. But to be honest, I think you guys in SoCal is probably having it even worse, so shouldn't complain.
Yeah.
California is getting pretty messy.
It is. We're relative. It's way less up where Alive and I are from. We're in Northern California. California is humongous, and LA County, and all that has the majority of that stuff. But welcome back to the stream, guys. Thank you so much for joining us once again. We did this for Molten Core, and it ended up being really, really fun and valuable. So I just want to give you guys a little bit of context for these watching right now. This is kind of a almost. I have selfish reasons for wanting to do this too, because I need to step my game up, so to speak, as well. As you guys remember, I went pretty hard during Molten Core, but during Blackwing Lair, I was kind of slacking, and only this past week or so, I really started to try to apply myself and go for nice parses and stuff like that. And got a couple pink parses this week, which I was happy with, but it's still just one step in the right direction. So I couldn't be more excited to have these guys here, and I'm super thrilled that they're here, willing to share their time and their knowledge. But yeah, let's just get started with history of the game. It seems like both of you guys have played for a long time and are super knowledgeable and stuff. Maybe we could just go take us back, Alive. Take us back to.
Okay, so I first started playing Classic WoW back on the Phoenix server, and I ended up playing in Work in Progress, which was the top guild at the time. Had a lot of good friends there. Then I ended up playing on Nostarius, and then I played on Elysium, Lightbringer, and a little bit played on Northdale. And now I'm playing on Classic.
Nice, man.
Yeah, and I started Korea Beta, I think, of Vanilla. And then I played EU Beta. I was in the military service, so I couldn't actually play on the launch. I think I started like 4 months into European. Vanilla, played the warrior main tank. That was really hard coming in late into the game, but eventually, after some good guilds actually transfer off, I played in the best guild. And then I played TBC, but more went PvP on the Shaman and also Wrath. And then for me, actually, Elysium was when I came back to WoW. So I had like a 9-year break from WoW, working with DreamHack and doing esports instead. But I felt it was fun after playing a bit of Legion to also come back into Classic, because my colleague and friend Windforce, who is Progress main tank, was hyping it so much. So I just, I level. And then fortunately I actually choose to play a Warlock because I want to run around and dot. That's not really how you play a Warlock in Classic, but I didn't know the point. But I was very fortunate that Windforce got me into Progress, and then Warlocks got open up almost directly, and then Alive helped me a lot to get up on par, I would say.
And I realized I had kind of a bad introduction and just said only what I did on private servers. But yeah, so on all the private servers I did play on, I'm a Warlock main on every server, always playing Warlock, and that's kind of my thing. So when I first met Hellspawn, He had never played caster before, so at first it was kind of a concern a little bit, but honestly, there's a lot of people out there that are worried about, this is my first time playing Classic. I really want to keep up with people, but this is my first time, and they get a little bit anxious about it. But really, all it takes is the willingness to seek out knowledge. Even one of our best warriors in the guild right now, he started on Elysium, and by the time he was finished Elysium, he was one of the best warriors in our guild, the guy Tetsu. And all it really takes for you guys out there who want to improve, it doesn't matter if it's your first time playing Classic, Vanilla WoW, that doesn't matter at all. As long as you're willing to go out and seek the knowledge, you can be one of the best players.
You love to see
I think
it.
also,
Sorry.
adding to that, I would say that when I came into the private scene of Vanilla, it was harder to actually find online information just because you didn't know what type of quality it had. So that's why I was very fortunate that Alive actually could give a lot of good directions and also help me out. But I think everyone who started at Classic had such a huge advantage because through Wowhead, through Twitches, through YouTubes, etc., there is actually a lot of good quality information and also these Discords. So I think that Warlocks today or anyone coming into Classic has an easier time than maybe I had. But of course, back in the days like 2004, like there were no information. I mean, almost Google wasn't around, so it was challenging times, I think. But I would say today it's easier, but hopefully we got some tricks up our sleeves that we can provide or give clarity to, because I think it also is somewhat opinionated. I always say that kind of logs in the end determines, and I think Alive and I have at least done some good logs once in a while.
Oh yeah, we're gonna get into that too, guys. I can't shill these guys enough, guys. I mean, Progress is one of the best guilds in the world. I mean, we covered them during the Blackwing Lair race. We actually went to Alive's perspective for a second, and it was cool watching them in action. So they're going to be providing you guys with what it's like to be a Warlock at a super big pumper, top end guild, because you do play differently depending on the fight length, right? You do play differently. Based on your raid composition. It's just like with tanking. There's also a takeaway from the DPS perspective as well. You're getting DPS differently depending on your kill speed and the composition of your group. So for me, I raid in like a semi-hardcore raid. I can give you guys just sort of like the more normie Warlock strats here from wherever that's worth, but it's really fascinating to get a glimpse into what it's like to play at that top percentile. And let me shill them a little bit further, guys. Thank you for all the subs, by the way. Dawkins in the house and a couple other subs. Sorry for a little late on that, but appreciate all the support, guys. But Alive and Hellspawn, they Hellspawn played. Was it World First 60 on Warlock? You said. That was the first thing I was going to get to.
I mean, coming into Classic, of course, our guild had very high ambitions. So we wanted to get world first Molten Core. We did get it on Northdale very easily, but I think that you can't compare the competition. So me and my group actually spent a lot of time on the beta during the summer, but also actually on PTRs of ourselves to nail everything out. I think we spent crazy amount of time, especially Kenny Marsh, our mage, but also Windforce in our group within crazy hours actually. I think that if it wouldn't have been dungeon meta, I think actually we would have had a even bigger leg up. So we were more prepared for outdoor leveling. Then we figure out that we could do better in dungeons. I think for sure when we came into for example Sulfurak, we probably did 20 to 30% more XP per hour than anyone else in the world, so we were far ahead. And I think at that point I was probably like second in the world or something like that. I didn't really care, to be honest, because that was not my goal. Unfortunately, we boomed out a lot when we went to BRD, and also in the way that we couldn't adapt to the LBRS meta, because it was a difference between the beta and the live that like one of the last things we did on the beta was to check exactly how raid XP was and a raid reputation, and it turned out that going into a raid and 6-man was heavily taking away XP. But when Classic came, actually it was no penalty. So for the first like 2 or 3 weeks, it was so beneficial running 10-mans in Sulfurak and LBRS.
I remember that, man, before they fixed it.
We didn't know because we were ahead. But I would say that a lot of people kind of maybe memed us that other did better in Sulfurak, but our 5-man group did more XP per hour than any 10-man group, I would say, with quite a bit of margin. That kind of showed how much time we had put into it.
How did you guys rank with regard to Molten Core? Were you top 5 in Molten Core?
No, so I mean, me and my group and maybe one more group in progress, I think were ahead of Apes. But they for sure did super good as a team, especially. So when they went into Molten Core, we were not able to enter. And then I think, like, I went to bed. I think a lot of people kind of lost a bit of motivation, etc. And then we kind of chilled, I would say. Of course, there was a lot of ours that was behind also. And then when we got news that Onslaught was entering Molten Core, we kind of speed up. So I think they entered Molten Core before us. But I think we did Molten Core, I don't know, 1 or 2 hours faster or something like that. So
yeah,
we did beat them. But
wait, you did beat Apes? What do you mean? Not Ragnaros, right?
No. So our timing path, we got to doing the Silithus rep grind for the Hydraxian Waterlords a bit late. So Apes ended up beating us by, we could have been probably about, I want to say, it was several months ago, but I want to say we could have been 9 to 10 hours behind them. But once we knew that they were getting the world first, we decided, okay, the race is over. We're going to get a bit of sleep. And then we heard that Onslaught was going to push it. So we decided, all right, screw it. We'll just go in because we don't want to lose to Onslaught. And we ended up finishing second.
Second, okay. So second place MC, then BWL, you guys came in first, was it?
First. We tied with, technically, we tied with a guild named Cataclysm, which I've played on many private servers.
Calamity,
and I've
right?
Calamity. Calamity? Yeah, Calamity. So I played on a lot of private servers, and I've never heard of the guild named Calamity. So for them to come and tie with us is pretty impressive. It's really good for them. I'm impressed. I will be fair. I will be honest that I think a lot of guilds obviously PTR'd for Blackwing Lair, and a lot of the PTRs that we're using at the time, since there wasn't a classic PTR, were more difficult because we were using private server PTR data, basically, values. And since those realms were more difficult, I think a lot of the guilds that practiced went into Blackwing Lair playing it too safely. So if we could have done the classic PTR for Blackwing Lair, I'm not saying any guild would have came in first or beat us or whatever, but I think generally speaking, the guilds would have played a lot more aggressively now that we know the damage values are what they are.
Mm-hmm. It was an interesting race to watch, man. I mean, congratulations. Either way, you guys killed it. I mean, that's huge. And the other thing I was going to say, guys, is that Alive, you've written multiple guides on Wowhead. That's mainly the way I followed you. So you've been around. We probably have a few Alive fans in the chat if anybody wants to show your support. But it's really, really good to have you guys here, man. Clearly very experienced, amazing players. We are very, very lucky, guys. So if you have any questions for them, or even for me, just start putting them in the chat. I'll upload it. I'll make a little spreadsheet over here on the right, and we can answer them as they come up. If there's anything super juicy. But here's the agenda for today, guys. We're going to talk about perspective going into Blackwing Lair. Now, we all know to get world buffs, get consumables, and all that type of stuff. Me personally, in our semi-hardcore raid, do I go out and get every last thing? No. But you kind of assess how much gold you have, how much time you have to play, where you are in the world, and you get what you can, at least personally. But let's just clear mind, guys. Alive, Hellspawn, you have raid, let's say tomorrow, or you're raiding later today. What is your...
I'm raiding in a few hours.
Raiding in a few hours. What is your method to the madness going into it? Anything juicy stand out as far as maybe where to get shards or any particular strats?
So normally speaking... Yeah, sure, you can start.
I think you will be able to talk so much about it. So I think that from my perspective, I think there are a couple of things, and that's during phase 1 it was exceptionally important to farm gold. Phase 2 was for the ranking, and now in phase 3 it's you can complete some more gold, you can get some alts up, etc. But at this point you kind of want to be in a good position, so you can if you're slow, if you have a lot of private stuff or work related, etc., you kind of want to only be able to raid log. even in the best guild in the world, you can do that. So, for example, I took a game break from this year. So I just recently came back. I'm a bit behind on the gold, but I still have like the 20k of gold type in consumables. So I don't really need it. What I kind of do is always that you max out your shards. You do all your world buffs. I think that the way I'm doing it and our guild is doing it is also that we have summoning warlocks. So in that way you can actually pick up all your world buffs pretty fast. And
Thanks
for
for
a
the awesome
warlock and a
content.
caster actually in classic, you don't need to take a BRD or a strat live buff because those are kind of mitigated out from the greater arcane elixir. So these very min-max buffs you actually don't need, I would say.
I think a lot of people don't even know about the BRD and Strat Live buffs.
Explain that.
Okay, so on private.
BRD and Strat Live buffs. I've heard of these. I heard Onslaught figured these out first. I'm not sure, but this is okay. Go. I actually have no idea what you're about to say.
It's hard to say who figured these buffs out first because I mean, private server players have been doing it for so long, so I'm not really sure who found it out first. But basically, on private servers, how buffs worked were. A buff would stack as long as it didn't have the same text as any other buff in the game. So down ranks of arcane intellect or anything of that nature. For example, Elixir of Sages gives you intellect and spirit, but it wouldn't give you the intellect part because there were other buffs in the game that give you intellect. Anyways, that's how buffs worked on private servers. And there was a BRD buff where if you go in BRD and you go past the arena, there is a spellcaster there that you can mind control, and it'll give you a buff called Fury of Ragnarok.
Yeah.
And it's a 30-minute buff that adds 25 spell damage. But the way it works is it adds 25 additional damage to the tooltip of your spell. So since it added it to the base tooltip of your spell, it ended up scaling very well with potions, percent damage, increased modifiers, and so on and so on.
What's the length on it?
30 minutes.
Okay.
So basically, you had to have all your buffs, and then when you did this buff, you needed to zone in directly or be able to zone in, because our best runs were about 23 to 25 minutes, meaning that like maybe you lost a 1 minute or 2 minute on the buff itself, and then maybe like raid start is 1 minute, and then basically we run out. So it was extremely important to min-max it, especially if you did the respec thing on top of that, so that you could have DS together with SM.
So tight. you would get all your 2-hour buffs, then you would get your 1-hour buff, and then you would go get teleported to a Warlock trainer, so you could do the respec buff where you demonic sacrifice your succubus for the 30-minute demonic sacrifice.
You
buff,
guys do that every week, to be honest. That's insane if you do. That's...
No, so that is something that I wanted to do every week in Classic, and I have the gold to do. But about 4, 5, 6 weeks, something like that, in Phase 1 of Classic, Blizzard randomly hot fixed it without any warning.
It doesn't work anymore? Oh,
no, it does not.
Oh, it worked during MC.
Yeah, that is something that I farmed a lot of gold for because I planned on doing it for every single raid. Because if you are a Warlock doing the respec buff, and your guild gives you 2 debuff slots, one for corruption and one for amplify Curse of Agony, no other class in the game can beat you unless you get really unlucky with resists.
Well, can you say that again? That sounds really juicy. I didn't quite fully comprehend the magnitude. Guys, type something in chat if you're alive. Alive is about to drop some knowledge right here.
Okay, so what the respec buff is you have your normal demonic sacrifice buff. You get all of your world buffs, and when you get all your world buffs, you get teleported, summoned to a Warlock trainer. Before you want to unlearn your talents, and before you unlearn your talents, you demonic sacrifice your succubus to gain the 30-minute 15% shadow damage demonic sacrifice buff, and then you immediately unlearn your talents. It does not take away your demonic sacrifice buff, and you can respec into Shadow Mastery Ruin. So you get the 10% shadow damage from Shadow Mastery, you get a chance to trigger Nightfall for a free Shadow Bolt, and you get 6% more Curse of Agony damage, and you get Amplify Curse. So in a speedrun guild like ours, for let's say Molten Core, for example, most of the bosses were lasting around 20 to 25 seconds, which is perfect timing for Amplify Curse of Agony. If you have 4 Warlocks, so you put up all 3 curses and you allow the 4th one to put up Agony, and you take 1 corruption slot away from one of the other Warlocks, the Warlock that is doing the respec buff early into the game with Amplify Curse of Agony, corruption, respecking, and all that, has the potential to beat every single class in a single target fight, including warriors.
Cheese and rice. That's insane. Yeah, that's unfortunate. It doesn't work anymore, though. Damn.
Yeah. I don't know why they took it away, because it's not something that allows you to one-shot a boss. It's not something that is, everyone's going to use. It's a very expensive thing to do, and a lot of people can't raid in sub 30 minutes. So, and if you die, you lose the buff. So I'm not sure why they took it away. There's so few people even utilizing it in the first place.
Yeah, but I would see it as a bug though. But I would say that for me, going Warlock against the Classic was what the live described, because actually you do get flat out 10% more damage, and for Warlock actually that's even more than 10% because of the crit. So you multiply it a couple of times, and therefore it actually is more than 10%. Also with the described BRD buff and with the Strat Live buff, I had calculated that I would about get 15% more, meaning that from just the standard damage without crits and multipliers, that would be 25% more damage, which actually would make that you should, if you get, needed the right way, be number 1 DPS when you do BWL. So that's just like a big bummer how Classic turned out. I don't think that that's still something that takes me or drives me away from Warlock, but let's say that you were hoping for the best as always, and both me and Live are kind of like believe so much in the Warlock class, even though I would say most people rate Warlock as being the worst DPS class. But I mean, when I POG, for example, right now, I'm number 1. Like, that's just how it is. And that's because I do flask, I do consume, I have my world buffs, but also the way I'm used to playing kind of excels out from that. But yeah, I guess that's the state of it. So going back to it, I think that setting up a routine in how you do all your world buffs, that you're having your shards and you're having all your consumables, and then you kind of try to maximize the duration of all of these. So you always take the DMT, the DMF, the Onyxia first, you take the Songflower last, for example, because you typically would maybe have a 1 hour BWL raid, then more or less you can have the Songflower throughout the whole one. And because the Warlock is so needy, meaning that all percentages of extra damage or percentage of extra crit would be more valuable than any other class, especially the crit part. So that's the best tips, I guess.
Crit is insanely important for Warlock, even especially into the early game. And this is something that countless people, even in my guild, have debated with me about multiple times. But every single time, not to sound boastful, but every single time logs are posted at the end of the raid, and it's boss encounter plus trash logs, I have multiple logs of not even a single mage beating me, because in a speedrun guild, when you're killing a Surger within 1 Shadow Bolt, or you're killing a dog within 1 to 2 Shadow Bolts, crit is what's going to make or break every single individual parse for every single pull, depending on the pull, if it's single target or up to 2 targets, and depending on the kill speed. But having a set that you can swap over to for specific trash pulls is what a lot of caster players, including myself, do in Molten Core, in Blackwing Lair, and so on.
What is the main goal you're achieving by swapping sets? You're going for a crit set versus a spell damage set, I'm assuming, right?
Yeah, so for example, in the early stages of Molten Core, as you enter Molten Core, I would have a full crit set for the first giant pack, and then you pull the Lava Surger or whatever's the single target mob right in front of you. It spawns randomly. It could be an Annihilator or a Fire Lord. And then I use that crit set for every single pull that is 1 or 2 mobs. And then I'll swap to a full flat spell power setup for the trash packs more near Shazra that have 4 mobs at a time.
Because you're multi-dotting.
Because I'm multi-dotting,
okay.
Correct.
Makes a lot of sense. Same with the big things there, the big ticket items there are trinkets too, right? Like you're switching away from either Eye of the Beast or whatever to something like Briarwood. Just
okay, so I didn't have a talisman for a very long time, and Dire Maul was not out back in Molten Core, obviously, so if I could swap to double spell power trinkets there, I would, but since we didn't really have options pre-Dire Maul, I kind of had to stay with Eye of the Beast and Briarwood.
Yeah. But I think also another part, very much to Eli's point, I think one way of thinking about it is that if you go farming and you actually are DSSL, that way, like the big farm build, then you don't want to have any crit at all. Like you only want to have raw spell power. And that is some of the fundamentals you can think about it, because you don't cast any hard cast, therefore you're just dotting. So it's the same basics. But I think other parts that I didn't utilize in Lightbringer, I think that the screenshots you kind of showing right now is from Lightbringer. So that's about 2.5 years ago. I think this one in particular is AQ, yeah. One thing that I didn't utilize, I don't know if Alive utilized it, I don't think you utilize it, was actually gear swapping into fire. So in Molten Core, when you get to Lucifron and you do all the hounds, I always will summon an imp and I will demonic sacrifice that one and swap into fire. And then you don't want crit because Hellfire is not critting. And in that way, together with Oil of Immolation, you actually are dominating the logs. You will be number one on these hounds pack. Mages might be on the same level, but typically like you're pumping.
Yeah. Huh? You won't beat a mage, but you do make a good point. Yeah, that's something that I encourage all of the Warlocks to do, and something that I encourage in the stream is to any single scenario that you ever Hellfire in a raid, any single scenario that accounts for multi-dotting Hellfiring or just purely Hellfiring, you should always have a full spell power or full fire setup. Like Hellspawn was saying in the early Molten Core days. I believe all of our Warlocks had Eye of Flame. We had Fire Striders from Strat Living and a full fire setup, because that is or flat spell power, because that's the only thing that is going to give you the most benefit out of any AoE situation. Having crit rating is essentially completely dead in any situation that you're Hellfiring.
I want to ask you guys a question too. So let's just think about this: 4 targets. And they're all clumped up together, right? Okay, let's say maybe even 3 targets. I'm trying to find the breakpoint here. But let's say there's 4 core hounds all on top of each other. Is that enough for you? Like, what is like the broad strokes rotation approach to that? For me personally, I would just Agony. I would make sure to get an Agony Corruption on each one, and then go in and go for a Hellfire. But I've always thought to myself, is it worth putting up that 4th Agony Corruption on that 4th one, because you're missing out on some Hellfire ticks on 3-4 targets.
That's actually a pretty common mistake.
Yeah.
So anytime there's, it really depends on what your character's values are, your spell power and whatnot. But generally speaking, 4 or more targets, you want to be dotting as you're moving in, preferably. It depends on how fast your guild is clearing that pack. Curse of Agony is going to do the most damage for a single global, but again, you kind of need to know exactly how long that pack is going to live. If it's not going to live for at least 80% of the Curse of Agony, if not more,
let's assume you get full value from it, though. Okay. On just a semi-hardcore raid, type of thing. For you guys, I assume the Agony, if your stuff is dying in 2 Shadow Bolts, that Agony barely does any damage on the first 4 ticks.
Okay, so what I was going back to earlier, that's actually a common mistake. A lot of Warlocks, they think, oh, I have dots, therefore, if I can multi-dot, I should. However, if you know that in any given pack that you are safe to Hellfire, there's no specific mechanic that's going to hurt you or knock you back or anything like that. The only time you want to dot and multi-dot is as you're moving into Hellfire position. As soon as you're in position for Oil of Immolation to trigger and Hellfire to trigger, it is better DPS for you to simply just start Hellfire.
You're saying even with 2, what is it, with 4 though? You said 4 plus? Is that breakaway? Because what if there's 3? 3, there's no way.
I would say, like, I do Hellfire when it's 3 mobs or more. 4 is without a given. But I think we're coming to fundamentals later on, I think, but we're going a bit left, right, center. But just to answer on this one is that very much to Alive's point, and I think here's one of the fundamentals how Warlocks can go from almost getting beaten by the tanks into actually being a bit more competitive. And that is that if you're playing in a guild where you can predict when the pulls will happen, so it's not just like ninja pulls or random stuff, you will know when it will happen. The way you need to do it is watch either your hunter or your tank very close, basically stand on top of them. So when they go in and shoot or body pull it, by that second you put on your curse, and after the GCD you do your corruption, and then you get in position and casting. So basically every fight where you have a curse assignment, you will have 3 seconds of free movement. And if you compare that with a mage, is that the mage would need, if it goes up to where the tank is standing and basically pre-casting, it would probably need to move after it because the mob will come to where the tank was standing, so to speak. Where the Warlock actually have 3 seconds of movement. So the way I'm playing, I will always be in the front in our guild. Like, I will always be ahead, but as soon as the mob is pulled, I will move backwards for 3 seconds during my dots, and then come into position and hard cast.
So and they have no problem with you standing on the tank? I like that strat a lot. Moving with the puller.
Especially in Molten Core, that is the correct way to play. It really depends on what raid, because there's some more dangerous mechanics going forward. But generally speaking, if you're comfortable with the players that you raid with, the Warlock during any given trash pull should be, and even on boss pulls, as long as there's no mechanic that threatens you otherwise, you should be on the front lines with the hunter that's pulling or the warrior that's pulling, because the very moment that one of these trash pulls gets in combat, you need to be immediately taking control of the situation, getting your curses up, getting your corruptions up, or doing whatever you need to do. And if you need to fix your positioning, you do it while you're using those globals on corruption or curse of recklessness and so on. And once the mobs are actually on top of you, if it's a hellfire situation, then make sure that you're standing where the tank is going to be standing. And if it's not a hellfire situation, then while you're doing your curse, while you're doing your corruption, you can be positioning yourself to where you need to be positioned, not in melee position.
And also talking about the dogs at Lucifer and Magmadar, is that the way I'm doing it, and it could be that you need to slice in agonies. Gotta commit or gotta confess, I probably have overlooked it, but the way I'm normally doing it is that I'm kind of far up, and then I do corruption, tab, corruption, maybe a third corruption. I never do a fourth corruption, and I never multi-dot 2 dogs. The reasoning for it is that we do too much damage typically, so I'm a bit afraid to die on the dogs. So when I'm fully pushing it, there's always a risk of dying, so you need to have your lip there. But basically I do corrupt, oil of immolation, hellfire, but that's because we're playing with some world-class tanks also that actually pick them up and do significant threat early. Maybe if I played in a more like semi-guild, I would more do like agony, and then go. But I would never go agony corruption on the same dog.
Okay. Well, here, just to get our fundamentals straight, just like you said, apologies if we're going left, right, left, center, right, all over the place. There's just so much to cover in so little time, right?
Yeah.
It's like, where to even start, right? So many juicy questions, at least I have. Just to get our ducks in a row here, let's just imagine that you have 3 targets right on top of you for some reason. Like, we're not factoring in the pull here. It's just you're standing on top of 3 targets, and you just have to do as much damage as possible within like 10 seconds or something to those 3 targets, or like let's say 20 seconds. What I'm getting from this is, like, because there's no travel time, because there's no mobile time where you're getting set up and moving into position, you just immediately hellfire is the number one thing to do.
Well, okay, so I'll take this one. If the mobs are already on top of you, do the tanks have a hold of them, or?
Yes, threat is not a concern.
Then you immediately start hellfire.
You immediately hellfire.
You oil of immolation and then hellfire.
2 targets. How does that differ? So sorry, Hellspawn. Yeah, what's your take on it? Let's see Hellspawn's first. Let me see what Hellspawn has to say on this.
Oh, sorry. I thought we were still talking about 4.
No. With the 3 target, I think it's a good question, but I think also you need to wait in the resistance of the mobs, because especially in Molten Core and in BWL, you do have certain targets, certain mobs that do have higher.
It's true. Let's not factor in resistance for now. This is just like trying to get to the conceptual broad stroke here, of like where you should rank the spells in your own mind. Like your own value system.
If it's 3 mobs, 3 mobs is kind of the iffy point 4 mobs or
is.
more and you Hellfire. 3 mobs, I would say it really vastly depends on your critical strike rating. If you don't have world buffs, then I would say Hellfire. If you're not going to get hit by anything, you're totally safe to Hellfire, and you don't have world buffs, I would say Hellfire.
On 3 targets.
Yes.
No corruption. Not even 1 corruption or 1 agony. Let's say you're doing 20 seconds of damage.
You could get 1 corruption off and then start to Hellfire. But if you have full world buffs and you have good gear and you have high crit rating, that's when your single target spells start to go up in value.
Mm-hmm.
So it would really you would have to bust out some math and really start to think about it. But at 3 mobs, if you still have world buffs, it could be better to put up corruptions, 1 corruption, and just start blasting with Shadow Bolt. It really depends on what your character's stats are. But if you're not raiding with world buffs, you'd most likely put 1 to 2 corruptions up and then Hellfire.
Yeah, and I would say that the 2 good examples of this is Lucifron and Gehennas, and both of those are not having a high fire resistance. But there is one more concern, and that is if your guild, typically maybe on the high level or mid level, they will kill like, add 1, add 2, and then kill Lucifron and Gehennas. Where I would say our guild, they will mainly go for Lucifron and Gehennas, and then just basically cleave that. And in that setup, it's better to go and fire, because all the 3 mobs will kind of die at the same time. You finish off with a Death Coil and a Shadow Burn. But if you go in like a mid-tier guild, which go in add Lucifron, add Gehennas, I actually would say it's better that you corrupt target 1, corrupt agony target 2, corrupt agony the boss if you have those slots, and then just Shadow Bolt. Because the problem that you will have if you're going into Fire Gear and Hellfire is that you're pushing your Hellfire, the 2 adds die, and then the boss is like 60-70%, and there you're standing with your Imp sacrificed, and you're standing with your Fire Gear, and you will do like no damage on the boss. So it's a bit hard to describe it, but I would say that the best way for us is to go FAP and full AoE, but many other guilds, I would say, it's better to go Shadow instead.
He brings up a good point. It also depends on if the mobs are dying all at the same time.
Mm.
In our guild, usually our melee are very, very good about killing things equally, and that's usually how our strategies work out as well in most circumstances. But in some other guilds, you may be focusing down 1 of the 3 adds, which could change how you play the situation. But I think, and it's totally up to you, but I think we're getting a little bit off track since this is supposed to be a Blackwing Lair overview, and we've talked about Molten Core for quite a while.
Yep, absolutely. What I'm getting from this, though, is that I need to rank Hellfire higher up in my value system as a Warlock. I think it's because I raid in like a semi-hardcore environment where stuff stays up a lot longer, right? So like I can get sufficient value from Agony, and I'm also allotted Curse of Agony slot a lot of the times. So I'm able to get up that Amplify, and because things, our kill times, I'm looking at, if you look at our BWL, I have my BWL logs up right now. Our kill times are like a minute 58 Ebon Rock, a minute 34 Flame Gore, Fire Maw 245. Like these are game changers, right? As far as probably way you guys would approach things as well.
There, some other classes like Mage, for example, your gameplay is a lot more black and white and linear. Like if it's this situation, I do this. If it's this, I do this. It's a lot more straightforward. Not to say that's a bad thing, but I'd say for Warlock, the situation has so many variables at any given moment because you have to put yourself in melee range. Is that a threat to you? Is there any AoE damage? Does that lowers your total overall threat table because you're in melee range, you don't have the buffer. You're also using life as a resource. And there's so many different variables where we can try to give an accurate explanation as long as we know all of the variables, but it really, really comes down to how well can you depend on your tanks, how well can you depend on your healers, and what kind of guild you're in.
Absolutely.
The gameplay is going to change if you don't raid with world buffs. gameplay is going to change if you're raiding with less tanks or more tanks, or there's a lot of different things that could come into play.
Absolutely.
And I think a good thing to point out is that I think that what our team, especially what we did in Lightbringer, and when I say team, I say the Warlock team, is that we try to see ourselves as one unit, because like Warlocks are the most needy class to be able to perform. But I think it also kind of hurts at least me personally, seeing all these Warlocks kind of getting beaten by the tanks, and everyone like, Warlocks are shit, you're here to just summon, do your curse and then go AFK. I hope that we kind of, through this call and today, can I point out that there is potential, and actually it's not only by metrics, it's actually by practice too. But you need to play around the strength and the weaknesses of the Warlock. And the Warlock is such a high potential class, meaning that if stars align and if things are configured for it, you will be number one. And I think there is also some other part that we get into, that
spicy
why Warlocks
take.
actually are
number
one.
Okay.
So I think there are some parts, like I mean, just to give example, and we can deep dive into it, that currently the world's fastest BWL Classic clear is done by Progress, where Alive was the only Warlock. And checking at that log, it looks like Alive, yeah, good Warlock, but he didn't do good damage. It's like in the bottom, he parsed bad. But only adding in the Curse of Recklessness into Alive's damage, if you have like 50 melees, I don't know what Curse of Recklessness actually contributes, but maybe it's about 100 DPS. It means that Alive without a doubt.
For rank 14 with the armor values that we have, it's around 100 DPS.
So it's not that much.
You can add. Yeah, so you can actually
per melee.
Oh, per melee. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That's,
so you can actually reduct the damage from the melee class and add it to the Warlock, meaning that the Warlock is just, completely above and beyond anything else.
One buff adds 200 DPS per pumper?
100.
Oh, 100. Oh, 100. Okay, that's still disgusting, though. Yeah, that's huge.
Well, Curse of Recklessness lowers armor by so much, and armor works in a logarithmic curve, which means the more you penetrate, the better it becomes up until 0.
Hell yeah, dude. That's
there's
sick,
a lot of those kind of things that you can also take into consideration, where that I think that gives me to my overall Warlock view, is that the first 2 Warlocks, saying that you have at least like 10 melee and you have at least 4 mages, the number 1 and number 2 in that raid will be Warlock with Curse of Recklessness and Warlock with Curse of Elements. Warlock 3 is always problematic, because Warlock 3, I would say, could potentially be a DPS decrease, because that Curse of Shadows only contributes to 3 Warlocks. However, Warlock 4, because it doesn't have a curse, and also because it will have a corruption slot, will actually, by metric, be comparable to everyone else. So if you take your best Warlock in your guild with the best gear, and that one is able to beat warriors, rogues, and mages, that is the Warlock that you should compare if you should add that 4th Warlock or not. You should not look at number 1, 2, and 3 who are having curse assignments, because curse by itself will probably reduce, depending on the guild, both 5 to 10% of damage. So even if I said that you open with your curse and you move, in the games that we are playing on the very highest level, that curse still you can't avoid, because you multi-dotting. So instead of putting up a curse on the second target, you would have cast a Shadow Bolt instead. And of course, a Shadow Bolt is just more damage than a curse that does no damage to your own log. The way to see it, and I think, going into the next step is AQ, is that like mages will fall off after 5 mages, is my view, where actually Warlocks, as long as you can have corruption slots, will benefit up to 6. So it changed quite a bit. But even for BWL, if you can have 4, 5, 6 Warlocks, look at the ones who doesn't have curse assignment, meaning Warlock 4, 5, 6, and see if they are able to beat the other DPSs. If so, you should have them.
Mm-hmm.
I agree. Doing curses and just tab targeting curses and casting, over 100 curses in any given raid is so much of a DPS loss that it kind of gives Warlocks a bad name because they look bad on the meters. But if you are one of the Warlocks that gets a PI assignment, gets a corruption slot, and has no curse assignment, if you know what you're doing and how to play it, you can do a lot of DPS. And kind of backtracking to what your question was earlier about the potential of Warlock, Warlock just by doing the math and knowing the spell power ratios and knowing what spell damage modifiers we have available, Warlock DPS for single target, purely single target, has one of the highest damage ceilings. The only issue is with Warlock this early into the game, as everyone knows, we don't really have much hit rating. So we still have a super high damage ceiling. It's just really, really difficult to reach that damage ceiling since our damage is so volatile. We can have improved Shadow Bolt resist. We can have our Shadow Bolt partially resist 75%, 50%, and 25%. And on top of that, you have little to no hit rating.
Well, you hear this all the time, but Warlock parses are kind of like RNG. You hear that all the time, right? Like you just get lucky, you get a bunch of crits, and bam, you got a really sweet log for the evening.
These buffs that we were talking about earlier, the BRD and Strat Undead buffs, back on private servers, I was doing a run, and I actually have a private video of this where in just Zul'Gurub in Blackwing Lair gear, just CG and Blackwing Lair gear, in Blackwing Lair, my Warlock was able to crit 7,000 damage and over 6,000 damage consistently.
That's insane.
Does that mean so just by looking at that, if we have, let's say, a 25-second flame gore, and I can, after I do my curse assignment, or let's say I have no curse assignment, I can get in maybe 10 Shadow Bolts or 9 Shadow Bolts, depending on my MS, Coil, and Shadow Burn ending, and so on and so on. If for any reason those 9 Shadow Bolts were, even 5 of them were critical strikes, I would be 2.7k, 2.8k DPS. But again, there's so many variables that come into play that you don't oftentimes see Warlocks get to reach their potential. And that kind of changes moving into ZG, because when you go into ZG, you just have Bloodvine, which gives you more hit rating. And the hit rating for Warlocks, it's not necessarily that it's going to increase your damage per se. You will be doing more DPS, but it doesn't really directly increase your damage. It just makes Warlock's damage less volatile.
Yeah, more smooth. Yep. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense actually with it. Let's get into talents, boys. So let's assume, maybe we can start with you, Hellspawn. What is your, so are you allowed a corruption slot? Are you allowed, an agony slot? What is your sort of preferred spec and why going into BWL?
So I'm used to having a corruption slot. You never have an agony slot. So agony you only use if it's off target. But I'm kind of used to that the targets just die too fast, so you never I barely ever use agony in MC or BWL, like extremely occasionally. In the plug that I'm running right now, we don't really have debuff stuff, so I actually been able to use agony too, and then damage kind of flies, I would say. I'm extremely boring when it comes to talent, so I played the standard DS Ruin.
DS Ruin, okay.
I'm basically have never played SM Ruin, and the reasoning for not playing SM Ruin is because in MC and BWL the imp is kind of useless because of fire resistance. Also, that in classic it actually runs out of mana faster than ever before, so I feel it's shit. You can play with the succubus, but it just feels like it dies way too much. Also, just that DS is 15% shadow, where SM is 10%, and DS is 15% fire, where SM is 0. And sure, you have the Nightfall, but as you don't have up a lot of corruption targets, especially not on boss fights, but also I would say actually on trash, you will get so few Nightfall procs. And I think also that everyone Nightfall is like free damage. You just get the extra Shadow Bolt, it's super good. Sure, but it's a GDC, so it's like 1.5 anyhow. So with the Shadow Bolt it's 2.5, so you don't even benefit from the full free cast, because you will not really finishing off with a Nightfall proc anyhow, because you will finish off with a Death Coil Shadow Burn. So I don't like SM Ruin, if I can say it like that. I think when it comes even into play is in AQ with a full 2.5, but not even there. Like, I think Warlocks show that DS Ruin is the #1 spec throughout the Warlock Classic.
You think so?
And on top of that, DS Ruin gives you the survivability by using the 3 points into improved Voidwalker for the improved Voidwalker shield, which if you're a good Warlock, you know when to use that, which we'll go over after we go through the bosses in Blackwing Lair, but the Voidwalker shield is a very, very important mechanic, and to play off of the Voidwalker shield, having Fell Domination can be a massive game changer in some particular points in Raid. But yeah, as Hellspawn was saying, going forward in AQ and Next Rammus, Demonic Sacrifice is still going to be the best spec for single target. However, SM Ruin gains value through some gimmicks. For example, in Next Rammus, if you're SM Ruin, then you have the increased range on your affliction spells through Grim Reach, which means on 4 Horsemen, you can actually outrange a lot of their abilities with your affliction spells. For example, the Void Zone you can outrange, the Chain Lightning you can outrange. So it's not that SM Ruin becomes the more dominant spec damage-wise. It just ends up that you can get away with doing more damage because the extra range on your affliction spells comes into play.
Here's my also thing: if we're on the same page, saying that Warlock, parsing in general, if that's your goal here, right, is to do as much damage, get nice logs, all this. If it's based on some RNG, wouldn't you kind of play to that and go for Nightfall, like in SM Ruin, like you would just rely on having some lucky Nightfall procs to try and get you a higher top end potential on
no, because so Nightfall gains a bit of value later on, since not all trash mobs are able to be clumped up together and cleaved down right away. Like in AQ40, after you go through the Twin Emperor's room and moving forward through that trash, there are mind flayers and things of that nature where you have to separate these mobs. You can't stack them up and AoE them down. And in those situations, I would say Nightfall is very nice to have, and even improved Curse of Agony for 6% more damage is nice to have, but it's just not worth it, at least in our guilds, in these earlier raids, such as Blackwing Lair and Molten Core, because a lot of the times, at least in our guild in Progress, you can stack up all of these mobs. In Molten Core, for the elemental packs, tanks can use a free action potion, stack up the mobs, you cleave them down right away, boom, they're dead. And you don't really get an opportunity to really utilize these multi-dots.
I'm saying single target though. I mean, I'm thinking there would be a concern that stuff died too quick. But so every tick of corruption you get a shot at Nightfall. So if you're going for just the highest potential single target parse on a mob, on a boss, wouldn't you throw up corruption, hope it gets lucky, it gets 3 Nightfall procs, all those Nightfall procs crit, and you have the highest possible.
Technically, if you get really, really lucky, SM Ruin has a higher damage ceiling. It's just you rarely ever reach that damage ceiling, because let's say, so corruption does 6 ticks, okay? Mm-hmm. And Nightfall has a 4% chance to proc. And that means that you'll have a 24% chance to proc it during 1 corruption. And for our boss fights, usually you can only use 1 to maybe 2 corruptions, which means you have maybe a 30 to 50% chance, depending on how many corruptions you're able to apply. So even if you have a 50% chance, let's say that accounts for half of a Shadow Bolt. Let's just say that 50% chance is going to do half of a Shadow Bolt, even though it's either yes or no. It's a coin flip. But let's say it does half of a Shadow Bolt. What Hellspawn was saying earlier is when you fire off that Shadow Bolt, it activates a GCD. So the tooltip of Nightfall says that you get Shadow Bolt instant cast for free, but it's not really instant cast.
You only get half, yeah.
It's a 1.5 second cast because it gives you a GCD. Mm-hmm. You're not able. It would truly be an instant cast if you fired it off and it gave you no GCD and you could immediately start casting a Shadow Bolt.
So in order to get 1 full Shadow Bolt, you need 2 Nightfall procs, pretty much. right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
So you'd have to get
Essentially.
super lucky on a boss. Like you'd have to get like 4 Nightfall procs or something, which barely ever happens in practice. You know, I don't think maybe it's never happened.
But at the same time with DS, as you have 15% and SM has 10%, if you're critting everything, those 5% suddenly actually becomes 10% because of the crit doing the double if it's not partially resisted.
Yeah.
Just adding to what you have up on the stream also, I would come with some suggestions, and that would be that
that spec is incorrect.
Yeah, I'm wondering. I'm curious. I'm trying to
removing the searing pain. What is that one called? Actually, improved searing pain.
Yeah.
And put in actually catalyst or cataclysm, because cataclysm is not great in any sense. It's actually shit. But you will run out of mana, and you will run out of mana, and you will maybe need to life tap at some point, and then it's better to have points in Cataclysm. Don't you agree, Alive? Or what is your view?
No. So in Molten Core, you have 2 extra points that you can use in the Destruction Tree, and those points are either going to be put into Cataclysm or into Searing Pain,
or maybe a potential of Intensity too. Some people do that.
That's if you put it in Intensity, that's basically saying that you don't trust your tanks, and you never want to play around failing.
True. That's a good point.
So the 2 points really come down to Cataclysm or Searing Pain, and I would say in Molten Core, I would go for Cataclysm because Searing Pain is immune. Almost every mob is immune. However, Searing Pain is actually a really, really important spell. In Blackwing Lair, you use Searing Pain quite a lot if you're really min-maxing your damage. And Cataclysm gives you such a small conservation on mana. It's only 2% and only on destruction spells. Such a small savings on mana that it's actually better to go 2 points into Searing Pain and get 4% extra crit chance on your Searing Pain.
Also, aren't your guys' fights so... Let me look at your fights again, actually. Like, I mean...
Also, you wouldn't put 24 points into Demonology. You'd go 21. The spec is 9, 21, 21.
So you should remove points into Unholy Power. I mean, it's completely waste.
Let's go together. Let's start it. Affliction, you go 5 points Corruption and 2 points Tap and 2 points in Suppression?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. Then Embrace, Impel Stone, Imp Voidwalker, Feldom, Felstam, Master Summoner.
So you have 4 points in Fel Stamina.
The only important points in Demonology are Fel Stamina, Hellstone, Improved Voidwalker, Fel Domination, Master Summoner, and Demonic Sacrifice. And pretty much Unholy Power, and the one that gives your pet more health. All of the other points are pretty much just...
Did we lose Alive?
He might have got muted for a second. So this is the spec that you use though, Hellspawn in Raid.
Give me 1 sec. I actually lost one. Let's see. Yeah, that looks correct. That's one I would use. And I mean, to be honest, if you could only click and have Ruin, DS, and like Insta Corruption, then you could remove the rest of the talent tree. Like Warlocks have the worst talent in the game that you don't utilize. But for example, Ruin and DS are... I mean, I think Ruin might even be the strongest talent in the game. Like it's so crazily strong, that one. And I mean, life tap, you don't want to do it, but when you do it, you want to get the most out of it. So, and because that you're having a higher hit rating later on, it doesn't make any sense to have more in suppression.
Someone made a really good point actually in the comments. I never thought about this because I'm rarely DS Rune. I'm always SM Rune for the most part. I'm really gonna give it a shot though after this and see the difference and get a comparison. You guys got me hyped for it. Mount Monkey says can move points out of Felstam on Holy Power for a health funnel, which will help with DM East farming. I'm curious. Do you do DM East farming? That's a very very interesting point. Yeah.
DM East is really good farm, especially if you have an alt, so you can cover all the different professions that you need. But yeah, Unholy Power and the talent Fel Stamina they're just filler points. You're going to be sacrificing your pet anyway. The only important points in the Demonology tree that we're utilizing are Improved Voidwalker, Master Summoner, Fel Domination, Demonic Sacrifice, Improved Hellstone, and the one that gives yourself stamina. Demonic Embrace.
Yeah. And I think we did get some questions here, and the live expanded a bit about Searing Pain versus Cataclysm. I would, maybe I'm dropping even a knowledge bomb for Alive. I'm not sure. I haven't told many about it, but I had overlooked actually Immolate. And why I'm saying that is that in BWL, and we come even more into that, it's actually extremely hard to play a Warlock, because either you do no damage or you do too much damage and you pull aggro and you die. But when a Wormkin or Chromagus early is fire, you always put up an Immolate. And then you start doing Searing Pain. And then you start doing Searing Pain, but Searing Pain actually is a tanking ability. But there is actually a trick which gives a bit lower total DPS, but actually higher because you won't pull aggro. So the total will be higher, is actually that you downrank Immolate one step. So you do Immolate, I think it's rank 7, and then you spam Immolate rank 6. That would make that the Immolate rank 7 will have the dot running, and you run Immolate rank 6.
Oh,
that will
it's like that Moonfire trick damage, for Druid. Wow.
But you will not reapply the dot.
Yeah.
And in this way, you can actually maximize the fire, like basically 99 on threat compared to the tank, without pulling aggro. And if you did Searing Pain, you will just do less damage before you pull threat.
Yo, that's
and that kind of takes it away a bit also from improved Searing Pain. I don't even know if I live you about this one or what about it.
Well, I mean, it's just how classic mechanics work. If there's a more powerful spell or effect already active, then it will not override it. That's how all of the buffs work in the game, and debuffs. But I would say that that's a really useful trick, and something that people should definitely utilize for Chromagus and for the Wormkins when they're fire vulnerable. But that is only to maximize your DPS if you're already near threat cap. But if you're playing in a guild like Progress, or you have a Fury tank that knows what he's doing, has good gear, and let's say that Chromagus isn't fire vulnerable the first vulnerability, it's fire vulnerable the second vulnerability, I'd still go Searing Pain, because doing a max rank Immolate and then spamming Searing Pain will yield the most theoretical DPS in any given situation that has fire vulnerability on single target. Again, the only issue with that is Searing Pain does 150% threat, which means you are going to generate a lot of threat. But there's a lot of ways to get around that. So I think the Immolate trick is very useful to know. But if you know what you're doing, and or you have a very competent tank, then I would say that it doesn't really come into factor too much. For example, on the Wormkin packs, and something I went over in my Blackwing Lair deep dive on my YouTube, on the Wormkin packs, a lot of times you can play around with your potion cooldown, and if you're Alliance, you can play around with Blessing of Protection, and you can intentionally spam aggro by using Searing Pain, and mitigate that by taunt rotations, Blessing of Protection, limited vulnerability. So you can go over the threat table doing the maximum amount of damage, knowing that you have those things to fall back on in case you do pull.
Yeah, very cool.
But I think concluding on this one, this is the preferred one. I think for can you say mid-tier guilds, I would say that Cataclysm is better. I think for the top one with the highest potential for sure, improved Searing Pain is. I think one point that Alive did, but I think we can emphasize on, is that one of the benefits with SM Ruin is that you actually get, it's called Grim Reach, right? So actually your Shadow Bolts and your curses or affliction spells are 40 yards, both of those, or is it 36? 36, right?
36.
It's 36, yeah.
It's 20% of 30, yeah.
Even I get a bit annoyed at several points when I can't really curse, like, you know, a Magmadar, or it can even be Nefarian, that you need to really position yourself perfectly to be able to curse and Shadow Bolt and not getting the fear. And with SM Ruin, you don't have that problem because you can be on 36 yards all the time, and that makes it easier, and in some occasions, especially if things goes wrong, it's beneficial. So even though I don't like SM, I think it would be maybe a easier game-wise.
Yeah.
But I sure would still say, if you're taking all the world buffs, you're in a good guild, you want to push meters, go DS Ruin, because that's the best.
Well, I have a selfish request from you guys. Like, this is honestly super helpful for myself and chat too. If you guys have any opinions on this too, so I'm in a semi-hardcore raid. As you can see, our kill speeds are pretty slow. Like 245 Fire Maw, 2 minutes Ebon Rock, 134 Flame Gore, 435 Chromagus, 430 for Neff, right?
435
for Chromagus, yeah.
Did you guys get Nature like 6 times in a row?
I'm not even sure, brother. I'm not even sure, but it's a different beast, man. When you're raiding like kind of a semi-hardcore environment, so most people come in without like full world buffs, myself included. I'll get like Oni Head and I'll get like a Songflower or something. That'll be it, and most of us aren't flasking or anything like this. But in this environment, for whatever it's worth, if you had to operate in this environment, what we're doing as a Warlock core is we're rotating through and we're letting one Warlock at a time use Agony. Now it's not optimal, but nothing about this raid is designed, completely optimal. You have to just keep this in mind, right? No one is really on that same page where they're trying to go full big pump, right? So some people choose to, and that's kind of where we're at right now. The Warlock core, we're going through the motions, and one person at a time is going to be able to go for a clap night and be able to use Agony. Now, what spec would you go? Is it a worthy consideration on these long, drawn-out fights and your authorized Agony to go SM Ruin, or would you still go DS Ruin? If you had a PI slot too, because we're going to be paying for the priest to give us a Parse Infusion.
Pay them?
Well, we're going to start because there's none of them are PI right now spec, but we're going to have one of them respec, and we're going to cover the respec costs. Yeah.
But my point is about this. Like, why is when we played before, everyone was PI. Mm-hmm. Even the Shadow Weaving priest was like PI Shadow Weave. Why are even holy a consideration? Is it just because people are worse, or I don't get it?
So, a lot of people, I'd say it's a mindset thing, and it could be a guild thing. So, a lot of people have struggles healing fights like Fire Maul and fights like Veil, fights where there's a lot of AoE damage going out. Sometimes techie packs can be troublesome for a lot of guilds. And some guilds, if you're not doing all of the mechanics properly and executing everything properly, then the plus healing from going holy is going to be more beneficial because they need that. They need that to survive Veil. They need that to survive Fire Maul. If they don't have that, they'll either run because they can't downrank properly, or they just don't do enough healing output. In a high-end guild like our guild and like Apes and some other high-end guilds, it doesn't really make any sense to be holy at all unless it's maybe a progression raid and you're just doing it to be safe, or a speed run because you're not really using many casters anyway, so there's no real need for PI. But in our guild, it's a bit of a different mindset. In our guild, a lot of times it's not about the healer's parse. It's not about how much healing can I do on the meter. It's more about what can you get away with. How a top end guild's mentality is play as aggressive as you possibly can and see what you can get away with, rather than play conservatively. And so having all of our priests go PI kind of follows that mindset by bringing as much to the raid output as we possibly can and just making...
Well, this is the spec I'm using right now, and my week already passed, so I already went through the week and got a couple pings this past week. For whatever that's worth, I was pretty happy with that. But I definitely could do a lot better. There's still a lot I'm not understanding about BWL. If you could get PI, this is kind of the Warlock dream. It's like our wet dream, right? PI, maybe multiple PIs, because no one's really competing for it that much in our raid, so if someone wants to step up and try and do that, people are usually supportive, and you have Agony slot and stuff. Would this be a spec you would go, or would you still go DS Ruin?
For Blackwing Lair, I would probably... It really just depends on... Are you trying to parse on Blackwing Lair overall, or do you only care about bosses? Is trash a factor to you?
Yeah, trash is a factor for sure. It's talk about just the entire performance of the raid overall. Just.
Then I would still probably go Demonic Sacrifice. It really depends on what strategies your guild utilizes. Because using the Voidwalker Sacrifice is still going to be good, but using Voidwalker Sacrifice is better the faster your kill speed, because obviously what you're trying to do here is minimize the amount of spell pushback you're generating through like Veilstress AoE damage, Fire Maul AoE damage, and things like that. So in the faster the guild you are, you have less time for that damage to go through your Voidwalker shield, through your Priest shield, through your Greater Fire Protection Potion shield. So I would say that Demonic Sacrifice does lose some value in a slower paced guild, but I would say it depends on your strategies for trash more importantly, because if you have any trash where you're AoEing it, such as Veilstress trash, those trash packs are very easy to AoE.
Yeah, we AoE those.
If you have multiple situations where you're utilizing AoE, or even using like Feldom on Chromagus, you can squeeze more damage out of Demonic Sacrifice, but Demonic Sacrifice is going to ask more of you as a player. You could be lazy and not change your Demonic Sacrifice buff at all.
You're saying sack the imp, right? To just for increased
yeah. So you want to save Feldom for a time that you need to alternate right away. So, for example, I have a macro where you can summon imp, instantly Feldom Demonic Sacrifices on Chromagus. If it immediately goes fire, I need to have that right away. But Fel Domination is a 15-minute cooldown, and that's a pretty long cooldown for a fast clearing guild. So you don't want to just use it whenever. You want to use it for a situation that actually needs you to summon something right away. But if you're a lazy player and you don't want to utilize the tools that Demonic Sacrifice has, then don't go Demonic Sacrifice in a slow-paced guild.
Yeah.
But I think also answering your question is that, number one, the one who should have a corruption, or like, I'm not used to anyone having an agony slot, but if you do have an agony slot, it should go to the one who has the highest spell power, because that's how he benefited most. And of course, if one is SM and one is DS, having the amplified agony, I guess, will make that agony not being more valuable. But then you have the downside that, let's say that you start Chromagus and the first vulnerability is Frost, for example, and the second one is Shadow. You don't want to have one Warlock having a lot more damage done at that point than the other ones, because you want everyone to maximize their Shadow Bolts at that point to be able to push threat. So it's a bit about how the Chromagus vulnerabilities works. Like, the worst you can ever get is that it's first fire and then shadow, because probably you will end up dead because you couldn't control it. I mean, remember that a Chromagus Shadow Bolt vulnerability crit normally does 10k, which means that if you have a really good tank, that's about 3 seconds or so, meaning that you cast a Shadow Bolt, and when you cast the second one, you will pull threat. So it's like very, very hard, and the hard part also is that you kind of stay off half a second, and then you need to be aggressive again, because otherwise you get behind. So Chromagus is a really, really hard boss to maximize it, and also adding in, time lapse into that configuration makes it even more sketchy. Both me and Alive have died a few times where people scream and are upset, but those two things happen, especially if you resist time lapse, I would say.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Anyhow, I would overall say that yes, if you are the ones having the highest spell damage and you are SM Ruin, sure, you should have the Agony slot. But I don't think anyone should play SM Ruin.
Okay, so this is really good. Like, what I'm taking from this is that you guys love DS Ruin, and you can squeeze out more damage on trash packs too, sacking the imp, and that there's a strong case for it. Especially with the Nightfall. You need 2 Nightfalls to get that free Shadow Bolt. Yeah. I
would say we heavily prefer Demonic Sacrifice because of the people we are. We are min-maxers. But if you're in a fast-paced guild and you're not a min-maxer, Demonic Sacrifice is still going to be better. But if you're in a slow-paced guild and you're not willing to utilize all the different tools that Demonic Sacrifice has, you don't want to think about all that, then just stay SM Ruin. But if you're in a slow-paced guild and you want to do everything you can to do the best that you can, then I would start practicing with Demonic Sacrifice and start getting the hang of it.
Hell yeah, man. All right. Well, that kind of answers the talent side of things. I'm learning a lot already, man. This is just such a treat, man. This is a delightful way to start the day. Let's get into some fights, boys. Let's go fight by fight, and then we can just and chat too, like key points, any tips and tricks you have for these fights as you go through them, anything to get ahead. Let's share some stuff. So we got, first off here, we have Razor Gore, first boss of BWL, the little egg gauntlet here. Is there anything that you've learned on Razor Gore, or anything that comes to mind at all, little things that you think you do or you've observed in others to put you in the best possible shape for this fight?
I can start a bit. I think Alive normally has more to say. So I think number one is that, I mean, remember that my configuration, I don't care about logs per se, so I care about speed time. But of course, for me, my personal part is my logs. And unfortunately, as it seems in current Classic, the trash on Razor Gore doesn't count. So in that way, this is a snooze fest. Mm-hmm. I would say that it acts extremely different compared to Private, but I kind of like the way that it acts in Classic because it's beneficial for casters. So the pug that I did last Sunday, I think I had like 6.5% rate damage, where number 2 was like 4.5, and this is not bad players that I have in that pug. And why I was able to in my second BWL perform so well is that if you're positioning yourself very good, so you basically can hard cast Shadow Bolts all the time on Dragonkins, and then only do Death Coils and Shadow Burns when you move, you will do more damage than anyone else. Like you're wrecking on this fight. But overall, this is a shit fight to even talk about when it comes to logs. But you need to learn how to position so you can hard cast all the time.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I don't know, Live, you have more?
Yeah, I would also say that if you only care about boss parse, then clearly phase 1 does not matter to you. But if you care about your parsing overall, then I would say phase 1 of this fight is also very, very dependent on your situational awareness and reaction time. So there's a spell priority list that you want to follow to maximize your DPS. Ideally, you want to be casting as many Shadow Bolts as you can get away with. However, there's not always a situation that dictates or that allows you to get that Shadow Bolt off. Particularly in faster clearing guilds, which is generally what I'm going to be referring to, since that is the habitat that I'm used to. But generally speaking, in my guild, you can never, ever, ever get a Shadow Bolt off on any of the orcs. The only thing that you can get a Shadow Bolt off on are the Dragonkins. So for me to parse on phase 1, the best thing for me to do is find the nearest Dragonkin and start casting Shadow Bolt on it right away. If there is no Dragonkin near me, let's say that I'm standing on one hemisphere, 50% of the room. I'm not standing directly in the middle of the room. I'm standing in between 2 corners. Then if a dragon spawns far away from me in one of the opposite 2 corners, and there's too much running, then I'll just stay and immediately try to Shadow Burn one of the orcs that spawns, get some Searing Pains off on one of the orcs that spawn, and I won't give up too much of my DPS time towards running to the other side of the room. However, you always want to keep your eyes peeled when the spawn waves come, because if one of the Dragonkins does spawn on your portion of the room, you need to immediately get on it. And most importantly is on Classic, this is not how they worked on private servers, but on Classic, the Dragonkin seem to always want to run up onto the pedestals as well, on the sides of the room. So you always want to position yourself as well to not get line of sighted as they go up the pedestals. I guess pedestal is the best way to say it, up the ramps on the side of the room. You always want to position yourself to not get line of sighted as soon as they start doing that, in case you end up missing out one of your Shadow Bolts. And another thing to mention here as well, on this specific boss encounter, I prefer to lean a bit more heavily into critical strike rating. Mm-hmm. And the reason I do that is, particularly for my guild situation, since I have to use Searing Pain, Death Coil, and Shadow Burn so often on this fight, and all 3 of those abilities have 43% spell power coefficients, very low spell power coefficients, and most of the time that I Shadow Burn, it's going to be only a Shadow Burn. That's all I have time for on that specific orc, or all I can get off on a Dragonkin is 1 Shadow Bolt, 1 Shadow Burn, that's it. One Searing Pain, that's it, and then it's dead. Since things die so quickly, and I'm using 3 different spells, 3 out of 4 of my spells are 43% spell power coefficient spells, then I'll actually parse better if I stack more crit, not necessarily all crit, but more crit and a little bit less heavy on spell power, because I'm utilizing those instant cast low spell power coefficient spells. So like a ring such as Band of Dark Dominion, I would swap away. Ebony Flame Gauntlets, I would swap away, because those give you shadow damage and a lot of spell power, but you're not just using shadow damage. Tome of Shadow Force, I would swap that off for Therazane's Touch, which gives you spell power, so it activates on both your Shadow Bolt and on your Searing Pain. And I would do things along those nature. Instead of Briarwood Reed, I would use Eye of the Beast on this specific fight, and things of that nature.
It's so funny you say that, though, like, because it's so dependent on your guild being progress, like killing stuff so fast. So
yeah.
in our semi-hardcore, raid environment, which probably most people are in the chat or something like that, the fight, this drags on for a bit, this first little gauntlet. It's kind of a snooze fest sometimes, but I would just approach it in the opposite way. I go high spell damage, and I just sit in the middle of the room, just literally throwing up agony corruption on like everything around me. 360 around me as everything is spawning, and then if I get aggro on something, I'll fear it off me, or I'll run. If it's really bad, I'll run up onto that little pedestal and like jump off the pedestal, so that it like gives the tank some time to pick it up off me. But in a situation where the mobs do stay up for a long time, I don't put up agony on the orcs. I don't even really try to touch the orcs usually. I'll just try and throw up the agony corruption on the dragonkins, and then just fling shadow bolts everywhere as I get nightfall procs.
If your guild has multiple dragons up at a time, like let's say you can't kill all the dragons before the next wave, and your guild stacks up mobs from wave to wave a little bit, you have overlapping, then I would say definitely lean more heavily into spell power, because you're not sitting there waiting for mobs to respawn. You always have an opportunity to cast Shadow Bolt. So like I said earlier, the spell priority list, Shadow Bolt's at the top of the spell priority list. You want to be casting that. And if you're in a guild that is killing things slow enough that you can be casting that, then you want to adjust your gear towards that scenario.
Absolutely.
If you're in a fast clearing guild that does not allow you to cast the number 1 priority spell, it knocks you down to lesser priority spells like Searing Pain, then you need to adjust your gear towards that. The
other thing I want to mention is that you guys do the same thing. Like there's no drop in combat between the trash and the boss, so you want to make sure you have all your coolies up, you have toe up, you have everything you need and full mana as you're engaging the boss and moving in between the adds to the boss. So that's just one thing to keep in mind if you are trying to go hard on the boss itself. Keep in mind the trash doesn't count. Don't get caught with your toe up down because you used it mid trash. Like I usually try to be conservative with it and only use it one time, and then I'll just wait all the way till the boss is up.
If you want to parse well on Razor Gore, make sure that when the last egg is coming up, you have full mana. Make sure that you have toe up off cooldown. Make sure that you have make sure that PI is off cooldown in case you used it on the pull. And make sure that you have a pre-popped Greater Fire Protection potion, because you want your potion cooldown to be, especially in slower clearing guilds, you want your potion cooldown to be off cooldown by the time Razor Gore is able to be engaged. That way you have a Greater Fire Protection potion up to negate any spell pushback from his Firebolt volley. And then you have a second potion that you can pop in case that he does enough Firebolt volleys to knock off your first.
Another thing you could do too is you could sack a Voidwalker well in advance and then get the bubble just for some additional stuff if you're worried about just the boss, like you're trying to get as much absorb.
If you're only cheesing the boss, I would say yes, but if you take the time to hard cast summon Voidwalker, then you're losing so much trash damage.
This is true.
I think some other parts is that it's very important to use your PI or TOEB early in that fight. So like basically if you see that you will be able to hard nuke a Dragon King the wall part, or even if more are up, that's good. I think that in progress, I would guess alive that you can never use PI on Razor Gore and then also having it up for Valastras.
Correct.
And in that way, you'd never use PI on Razor Gore because you need to have that the damage on Valastras. Both that is beneficial to your log, but also it's beneficial to your guild. So typically, you don't use PI on Razor Gore, just on the trash.
I'd say it depends on what you're going for. If you're going for what is best in mind for the guild, then it's more important for you to burn down Valastras quickly and use cooldowns on Valastras as opposed to Razor Gore. But if you're only focusing on your parses and that's all you care about is parsing well, I would say use your PI and use your Toeb on whichever boss you have a lower parse on at the given moment.
Yep. I gotta go hard on Razor Gore. My Razor Gore is kind of low right now. I don't know why.
Yeah, just to round out your average, because how the ranking works on Warcraft logs, sometimes you'll have a bad parse on one boss, sometimes you'll have a great parse on the other ones, and you just need to bring up one of your parses. But if you're raiding with the goal in mind that you want to do what's best for the raid, then you should be using your cooldowns on Veil instead of Razor Gore, because killing Veil faster is much more important.
It's true. Most guilds, you're going to have those coolies up, though, available for Veil just because you move at a slower pace, right? Like in Progress, you have to actually pick and choose which one you use your coolies on. It's funny, man. Moving on to Veil, though. This is a spicy one. So people are already asking in the chat, how do the big brains handle Veil? It's a spicy fight for Warlocks. You got to have your trigger finger on that lip. And I'm really curious. This is one of the hottest topics.
So going from like A to Z on this one is that on Razor Gore, when he's doing the fire volleyball, and you know that it will die before the second one, then you pop a fire pot. And this fire pot is not for Razor Gore; it's actually for Valastras. That's how we do it when we do it very fast. You run in, you make sure that you don't take any fire damage from the dynamites of the goblins, and then Razor Gore starts. And Razor Gore is a bit different than Valastras is a bit different compared to what I'm used to, but I think I know how to do it at least. And that is that first you cast a Voidwalker, and then you see on the cooldown on it, and then at the point when it's about 15 seconds until it starts, you sacrifice, not demonic sacrifice, your Voidwalker, and then you hardcast your Succubus, and then you demon sacrifice her. And then basically you do your corruption about 1 second into the fight, and then you just hardcast Shadow Bolts. What you want to do is also that you want to use PI and Toeb basically from the get-go, because if you have a guild that kills it under 30 seconds, you want to have it up more or less from the get-go, so basically from the second Shadow Bolt. The other part that you can do is that you make sure that the PI priest that you have will spam a power shield on you directly when your Voidwalker sack is going away. Another point that I think is possible is actually that when your fire pot is running out, because you will use it again, because you used it 2 minutes earlier at Razor Gore, but you can actually squeeze in, I believe, a flame deflector also after the fire pot is out, so you get 500 extra from the pushback, because pushback in Classic is extremely harsh on yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So like what I'm used to is that pushback is not so big, but in Classic you get completely rippled. So you want to have like double fire pots, you want to have the sacrifice, you want to have the shield, power world shield, and I would also say a flame deflector should add on that one to help.
Flame deflector, the trinket?
No, so it's a use item, engineering item.
Oh, I've never used that shit.
So in private servers you could actually use this one combined with the fire pot, but because in Classic actually it takes the same buff slot, but you should be able to use this one after a fire pot, I believe, but actually haven't been able to use it yourself. I don't know if you have done it alive.
Yeah, I mean, it won't do it with GFPP up, but you can work it so, like, let's say GFPP is on cooldown and it falls off, that you could use it. But generally speaking, I think that Hellspawn explained the fight pretty well. if you see Razor Gore doing a firebolt volley and you know that it's going to be the last one before he dies, immediately pop a GFPP so that you have your GFPP off cooldown for the next encounter when you go into Veil, because you're going to want 2 of them. You're right about all the Fel dominate, about the Voidwalker sacrifice. It's really, really important for Priest too, like he said. You can't... Power Word Shield and Voidwalker Sacrifice Shield do not stack, but what your Priest can do is make a weak aura to see when you're... to track your Voidwalker Shield, your Sacrifice Shield, and when it falls off, he can start doing Bubble on you right away to mitigate your spell pushback. But something that you didn't mention here, since spell pushback is so harsh on Classic, you really, really want to avoid it if you're trying to parse well. You want to use a little bit of fire resistance gear on Veilistraz, particularly...
Really?
Particularly the longer the boss fight takes. So in a guild like Progress, we hardly have to use any at all, because we kill it so quickly. We kill it before the tank gets.
What about for my raid? I'll be honest with you, dude. I never put on fire resist gear pretty much ever, just because it feels so unbelievably terrible to take off your juicy gear and put on some scuffed ass FR.
But there are some tricks to you right now. For example, like if you have double Nemesis legs, then you can have one with spell power, which is only 8, and one actually with fire resistance. So that's 23. The same is like if you're using a free Nemesis combination with the head, then you can have one with 8 spell power and one with fire. In that way, you actually get 40 extra that basically you don't sacrifice anything on. There are a couple of other items, but I would say
you don't.
When you are at a 1 minute type of Valistras skill, I would say that even if you full consume everything we just mentioned, you more or less, I would say, almost want full fire res gear, like almost 5 more setup.
So you guys do the same thing on Fire Maw, then I'm assuming. Then you guys are talking
on Fire Maw, fire res is way more important. But on Veilistraz, when I say you put on fire resistance gear, I'm not saying you put on gear that only has fire resistance, like some green of resistance rings.
Yeah.
No, that is
how
not
much
what
you going
mean.
for, bro? How much fire resistance are you going for?
So something I would do is, like Hellspawn said, I have 2 pairs of tier 2 pants, and
you lucky bastard.
The tier 2 pants has 10 fire resistance already on it. So what I do is I have a second pair of pants that I enchant with plus 20 fire resistance. And then I'll have a second helmet that I enchant with plus 20 fire resistance. And it can even be a helmet that doesn't have fire resistance on it normally. Just a rank 10 helmet or a tier 2 helmet or whatever helmet you're using. And on top of that, you can get multiple different 3-piece bonuses with tier 2, which... as a side note, less options will be available moving forward because you have to wear Bloodvine, and Bloodvine's just too good. But for example, right now, before we get Bloodvine, one of the best pieces that you can use for 3-piece tier 2 to get the 23 spell power is the chest piece. The chest piece is quite good. It's 1% crit, 32 spell power, and on top of that, it has 10 fire resistance. Yeah. So if you're wearing the pants, because you already want to wear the pants, that gives you 30 fire resistance, including the enchant. If you have it on the helmet, now it's 50. If you're wearing your tier 2 chest, which is already a good DPS item, you already want to wear it. Mm-hmm. That's another 10. Mm-hmm. The shoulders for tier 2, they're not the best shoulders in the game. They're not better than shoulders of Blackwing Cabal.
Hey, got mine last week.
But they're a little bit less spell power, and they have 10 fire resistance. And tier 2 boots, they're not better than Snowblind shoes if you are able to kill a Zergos, but they're still really good, and they have 10 fire resistance. So it's not that you put like crappy fire resistance pieces on. You put pieces on that are missing like 6 spell power off Bis, 7 spell power off Bis, but they have
how much you shooting for though? Or is it just however much you end up with? You just find that compromise. But I'm thinking about like 100 FR or something like that.
So, are we talking about total or off gear? Because we also raid with UBRS buff.
All of
which
you?
Adds a
you
lot
all
of
go to you clear out Ubers? Yes. I guess at that point you're already going full. Yeah, all right. I mean, how much does that give you again? Like 80 or something?
81, I believe.
81.
No, 81.
The UBRS gives 60, right?
60. Okay.
No. 60 is the Paladin aura.
Okay. Is UBRS 81?
That's insane,
81.
brother. But that's actually not too
83.
bad to get, actually. How long does it take to do UBRS? I mean, the thing is, you already have all your world buffs when you get it, though.
It's in the first room. It's in the first room. You go in UBRS, you cross the bridge, the Spellbinder's right there, you get it, you're done.
It's true. It takes a while for like a not like for a semi-hardcore raid to all go get it and split off into groups and stuff. Though it takes like 20 minutes from raid time or something. For you guys, you probably have it down to science though, like 5 minutes or something.
And also something that a lot of people don't use is there's also a fire resistance Juju, an eco from Winterspring. Shardtooth eco you can turn into Juju Ember, which is another 15 fire resistance. So, and along with Paladin Aura or Totem, along with UBRS buff, along with Juju Ember, Gift of the Wild gives you a little bit of fire resistance, or all resistance, I should say. Adding all these things together, you end up getting a ton of fire resistance for very, very, very little drawback. The buffs that I stated are literally 0 drawback. But putting pieces like tier 2 shoulders on, tier 2 boots, and things of this nature is very, very small drawback compared to the benefits that you gain, because the more fire resistance you have, the longer that your power word shield is going to last before it breaks, the longer your GFPP is going to last before it breaks, the longer your Void Walker shield is going, everything is going to go up in value.
That's so true, man. I'm actually learning so much from this, dude. I'm becoming woke to the power of FR right now.
This part I had overlooked quite a bit, also because I've been on a player break since before BWL. But for example, I did see on a live's gear that he's using head of Onyxia, so the ring, right? Mm-hmm. And that ring, I would never say, oh, I want it or I would use it. But in the current classic meta as we are, actually it's worth getting head of Onyxia and the ring and swap that one out.
Dragon Slayer Signet. I got Dragon Slayer Signet back in Molten Core because that was part of my crit setup. So back in Molten Core when we were speed clearing Molten Core, and I told you I had a crit setup. So back in Molten Core, as my crit setup, I would use the Onyxia ring, which is stem, int, fire resist, and crit. I would use Ring of Entropy off of Doomlord Kha'Zix, which is stem, int, and 1% crit. I would use Gloves of Spell Mastery, which is 2% crit. I would use Cap of Scarlet Savant, which is 2% crit. And I would go very deep on the critical strike rating. Mm-hmm. But Dragon Slayer Signet, I would say, compared to the rings that are available in Blackwing Lair, is quite bad. Dragon Slayer Signet is not that bad compared to BRD Quest Ring. It's not that bad compared to Maiden Circle. But when you start comparing it to Band of Dark Dominion and Band of Force Concentration, it's a pretty strict downgrade. So I wouldn't. That would be a fire resistance slot that I would look to move away from. But I don't currently have a Band of Dark Dominion. So currently I use that ring as a fire resistance ring on Fire Maul and Valestraz over my Maiden Circle. But if I had a Band of Dark Dominion, I would not use that ring. I would use Band of Dark Dominion, and I would look to get fire resistance elsewhere.
I see.
And I think also proving the point is like both me and Alive, we craft double legs of Bloodvine, and we have one with the Warlock enchant from CG and one with fire enchant. So like that's the level of how we prioritize it. On Fire even more so. On Valestras, because progress has such a fast kill time, probably is not beneficial. But for guilds who have like maybe 2 tank burns, etc., I would say go full fire rest on that one, because someone in the chat Alive did say here that even if you have fire rest, you do get the pushback. Meaning that for us it makes sense because we protecting our shields with the fire res, but if you're having a long kill time, you will not be able to protect your shields as much. So maybe the diagram is going up again to not have fire res if you have a long kill.
So how the mechanic works for Valestraz in particular is the fire resistance is going to increase your odds of full resisting the damage, not partial resisting. At least that's the data that I've seen on Classic, some things are different than private servers so far, and I haven't been able to test everything, but the fire resistance should be increasing your chance to full resist, which means you can have bad RNG, similar to Fire Maul. You can have bad RNG and still take the same amount of fire damage, but having that complementary fire resistance just slightly increases your chance to full resist each tick. And if that full resistance happens, then of course your absorbs end up becoming more beneficial. So for Veilastraz, I disagree. I would not stack fire resistance, because you're not going to be able to get enough fire resistance to really increases your chances to like reliably full resist the damage every time. You're not going to be able to reach that much fire resistance unless you completely gimp your damage a huge amount. But I would say for Veilastraz, use fire resistance pieces that are complementary to your DPS as is.
Another thing I'm thinking of right now, bro. So our Veilastraz kills a minute 15. Yours is how long, probably, if you had to guess off the top of that? Let me just
our last kill, we only had one bomb, so maybe like 20-30 seconds.
20-30 seconds. So you can pop another, instead of a mana push, I'm pretty sure my mana will last a minute 15, right? My mana will last
a minute. You have infinite
15.
mana on Veilastraz.
Oh, yeah, true. What am I saying? Sorry, I'm retarded. But so I'm saying, so you're popping, so with the point I'm trying to make is you're popping a GFP, or you're popping a protection potion mid-fight. Like,
yeah, so you have one
prio,
pre-pop,
right?
and then
There's
you
nothing
pop
better.
it. Okay. We didn't really go into it, but maybe some listeners here haven't maybe played on the same level, or even starting to approach into that. And that's like when you cast a Shadow Bolt, right before you start casting the second Shadow Bolt, you do pop your pot in between. So basically you don't lose any time on the cast, because you're popping your consumables in between. So what you're doing is that when you see that the fire, either you calculate it and know it by heart, or when you see that the debuff from the absorb protection pot is falling down, the next time to cast, that's when you pop your fire pot and then do the Shadow Bolt. So it's kind of seamless on the cast, so to speak, and that's how you use your demonic your demonic runes, and how you use your mana pots normally too. So having that type of skill of using consumables in between casts is very crucial, and even more so on Veilastraz. So you don't stop a hard cast because you see you get pushed back to use your consume. You let that hard cast come through, and then you pop it.
I just thought of another big brain thing. So okay, this is something. So first of all, let me ask you this, guys. On Veilastraz, are you guys, with your current tanking setup and everything like that, are you able to go full zug right off the jump and not have to wait at all? Yes. Right? Yeah, the fight's so short that it's not a problem.
The only time that we have issues on threat as a Warlock is if you become the bomb and you can instant cast Shadow Bolt.
Yeah, okay.
But then you don't do any threat, right?
You do a lot of threat.
I think that you cannot get aggro when you have the burning, right? That's how it should be.
I think I think you might be right.
You might be right. You might be right.
Because think about it. I've gotten it before. Before you stand off to the left and you just start flinging Shadow Bolts for massive damage, right? Yeah. Like you would definitely pull if you. You
have minus 80% threat.
Yeah.
So you just remember that to set number 1 parse, you will need to die in that one, and you want to have a kinda late bomb, but that you just die in the Veilastraz die, because basically from you get, is it called Burning Adrenaline, or is that the one that gets the tanks get? Whichever debuff that Veilastraz gives you that makes you go into being the bomb, from the second you get it, you just hit your Shadow Bolt button, like you smash it, because you will just cast all the time. So when you're moving, you're smashing your button basically, and then you would do like the 1500 DPS or something crazy like that.
Yeah. I mean, to be completely honest, all of the tips that we've given on Veilastraz so far will help you parse better, but the world record top parses on Veilastraz are gonna be made by people who got the bomb. You will not be able to beat someone who got the bomb and is just blasting. But something that I'd like to mention going forward, there are some things that get in the way of this, but the best time to pop PI and Talisman if you have a Talisman and PI, or Zandalar Hero Charm going forward, or anything of that nature. You don't want to pop it right off of the start, and that's because of Shadow Weaving. You want to wait till Shadow Weaving's at 5 stacks before you start doing popping your cooldowns. That way you get the most damage potential out of those cooldowns. However, there are certain things that could get in the way of that and change the game plan. For example, on Valistraz, if you know that your absorbs are not going to last very long and you're going to start getting spell pushback, then I would not wait for Shadow Weaving to get fully stacked up. And also on fights where in our guild, for example, some boss fights we kill very, very quickly. Yeah. So I can't just wait for 5 stacks of Shadow Weaving, because if I wait for 5 stacks of Shadow Weaving to go up, then the boss is at 50% health. So if the boss dies too quickly, which is probably not going to be the case for most guilds, then you also have to pop it right away, and you cannot wait. But the ideal situation, if there's nothing interrupting you, you have no spell pushback, and you're totally free to do whatever you want. Like, let's say when Nefarian lands, Nefarian's generally speaking a pretty long fight. You don't want to get in position and immediately call for PI, pop your cooldowns. You want to wait till the Shadow Weaving is fully stacked up and then pop your cooldowns.
That's a really good point.
You want to see Shadow Weaving, improved Shadow Bolt, and a Nightfall up, and then you pop and go ham, basically. But to Alive's point, Valistras, which we still are on, is that it starts, it's 1 second before you want to do something, or half a second. Then you actually typically do your curse and then your corruption, and then cast a Shadow Bolt. All those is like 1 second plus 3 seconds plus 2.5 seconds. If you have a 30-second Valistras kill, you need to pop it after your first Shadow Bolt. Otherwise, you will not benefit from it, because you will just have the buff with instead. So
yeah, it's true.
You just need to kind of count backwards from.
This is where feeling out your raid is really important too, because if you think that you have a shot at getting that second toe-up value, right, based on the historic precedent of your kill speed on the boss, because for that's kind of the boat that I'm in with our guild, not on Veil in particular, but with other bosses, right? Then you just want to time it so that you get, two sets of toe-up pops. Yeah.
The chance of the time aligning so perfectly that way is pretty low. But again, that's something that you could just review in your logs. If you know your guild is killing X boss at a consistent rate, every single week it's a few seconds variance, then yeah, that is something that you want to look at. There's actually 2 more really secret tricks that you can do on Valistraz that I haven't even told a few of my guild members.
Oh shit.
But I haven't been able to fully test it on Classic because I haven't been getting the bomb. So I haven't been able to fully test it. But how it worked on private servers is, if you get the bomb, you can pop a Flask of Petrification right before it goes off. And Flask of Petrification, the tooltip, makes you immune to all spell and physical damage. So it'll go off and you will not die.
Oh man, save the world buffs.
So what could go wrong here on Classic is right as you click and use the Flask of Petrification, it could immediately detonate the bomb and force you to take the damage. It didn't work that way on private servers, and I haven't been able to test it yet. But maybe that'll change in a couple hours when we go into Molten Core. But if that is working, that is huge, because that means not only can you get the bomb and pump damage extremely, but you can also continue doing damage, and on top of that, not lose your world buffs. And the second thing is, on private servers, I haven't been able to confirm this without going on to the Classic PTR, but on private servers, the bomb that Warlocks get most of the time, at least in my guild, is the second bomb, because the first 2 bombs are going to be chosen off of they're always going to pick mana users, and the higher threat you are, the more likely it is to be chosen. So usually the first people that get the bomb, if you start doing damage right away like we do in my guild, the first people to usually get the bomb is either a healer, because they have to start healing the tank right away, or a hunter. Generally speaking, the second bomb will go to a Warlock or a Mage. Usually, typically a Warlock, since they generate a little bit more threat than a Mage. So what I like to do is right before the second bomb goes out, and this worked on private servers. Again, I haven't been able to 100% confirm on Classic. It's been working so far, but I don't want to give 100% confirmation. I call for a Blessing of Protection a couple seconds before the second Valistraz bomb goes out, because that is the one to likely target me. And if I call for a Blessing of Protection, it worked on private service in such a way where you were taken off of the possible candidate list of receiving bomb. As long as you have
like zero threat, basically.
As long as you have Blessing of Protection active, you cannot be chosen as a bomb. And then the third bomb will always go to a tank. So you can completely bypass that.
Yeah, but that is what we get into, a bit of a greedy play, so to speak. But I think having healers getting the bomb on the first is good for the guild. I think dodging it and passing it on to the next one is questionable.
Well, I mean, the most ideal situation is to have the bombs go on the healers, because world buffs affect healers the least. Obviously, crit is good for healers, but the more world buffs you have on DPS, the faster the raid is going to be in conflict.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Should we move on?
Yeah, let's move on. We got to blast through these. Velstraw is one of the juiciest ones. So Broodlord. Okay, Broodlord's next. Yeah, we'll try and rip through these here. All right, let's think about this. Broodlord, you just cleared suppression room. You're walking up to him right off the bat. Yeah, go for it.
So I mean, Broodlord, I would say remember to take your what's it called? Tumber surprise right before the pull, so
the food. Yeah, sure.
And the normal way that guilds do this is that they run across the room to the left side of the gate. And if you have a really good tank, you actually do want to do your curse, you corrupt, and then actually do Death Coil Shadowburn when you run. But I have not even been that ballsy that I do it. What has been the meta now in Classic, which for sure is better for the guild and also for the casters, is that you just go around the corner and go to the right instead. So in that way you don't need to move as much, and maybe you can do a Death Coil and Shadowburn when you move that one, but I would say that Broodlord is one, if not the, after Cro-Magus, most sketchy boss for a Warlock. Because typically, if you do things right and you have a good guild and you have good gear and you know what you're doing and you're full buff, there is a high chance that you pull threat. This is like the number one threat mechanic, and that's just because of the aggro decrease, aggro reset that the tanks would eat.
Knockback.
Yeah, so this one is sketchy as hell. And basically you just pump. I stopped to quite a lot of damage mid-fight on this one if I see it going in the wrong way. But also you do want to chug through a bop and a lip in the end when you finish it.
Yeah, so I would say faster clearing guilds have a much easier time parsing on this boss, because you experience less of the knock-away mechanic, which is the one that is going to reduce your tank's threat. And in addition to that, there is a grace period for executing a boss where threat doesn't matter, and that's by using Blessing of Protection and limited invulnerability potions. And the faster your guild is at killing a boss, the larger the window is, I guess I would say, for that grace period. So, for example, if you're killing a boss at a really slow rate, then you could probably call for a Blessing of Protection at 10% of the boss's health and be able to pump threat even beyond the tank. You can completely disregard threat if you're in a slow clearing guild and you call for it at 10%, because you know, okay, if I call for it at 10%, the boss is going to die before my Blessing of Protection falls off, or the limited invulnerability potion falls off. So you can execute it and not worry about threat if you know the boss is going to die. And if you're in a faster clearing guild, that window, instead of 10% of the boss's health, becomes 30% or 40% of the boss's health. And Alliance has it even easier, because not only do you have limited invulnerability potion, but you can rotate limited invulnerability potion into blessing of protection, or vice versa. So you actually have a longer grace period to go over the threat cap and nuke the boss.
Never in my life have I used the lip aggressively. I'm about to start though. That's huge, Bryn.
That is probably one of the best DPS consumables for threat sensitive fights. The only issue is you have to be experienced with your guild. You have to know your guild's kill potential. You have to know how fast your guild has been killing the boss in the past, because if you go for this and you call for a blessing of protection, or you call for a limited invulnerability potion, and you got your timing wrong, let's say you start blasting, you got PI going, you're doing a ton of damage, the tank gets knocked back, and you're still blasting, you're going hard, you're way above the tank in threat, and let's say the boss doesn't die and limited invulnerability potion runs out, then you just screwed half the raid, because the boss is going to immediately come run over to you. So it's this grace period, by using limited invulnerability potion aggressively and blessing of protection aggressively, is super, super beneficial towards parsing on threat-sensitive boss fights. However, you need to make sure you know the pace of your guild's kill speed.
I think we'll just use it at the end, Ben. Like, just use it towards, so, like, just give yourself a runway if you know, like, the fight's probably going to end shortly after the lip expires, so the aggro won't even be, like, an issue. I'm just thinking, like, you would fill your guild out, but, like, you just keep the potion in the tank and just monitor your mana in case, and if you didn't need the mana potion or something like that, and you're towards the end of the fight and you're up there on threat, just pop the lip and go full Zug.
Yeah, I mean, it's very, very good to do. You just want to make sure that it dies before the lip runs out, or immediately after it runs out, or something close to.
All right.
Yeah, and I think adding on top of that is just that the suppression aura is very huge, more larger than we are used to. So if you have the position of the casters at the gate, you actually need to hug the wall 100%. So I think I did that error. I think Alive did it if it was your server first, or speed run, that like you stand where you're used to standing and you eat this one. I think it's also good to know that if you get the suppression aura, it's actually typically beneficial to move out of it and not cast, because when it ticks off, you will cast a faster Shadow Bolt than actually just let it hard cast with the suppression on. So that one is a bit tricky. I'm not fully as experienced on the, can we say, around the corners, you go directly to the right. But I think you also need to really, really stand in the corner, because the suppression aura is completely wrecking your DPS and your logs. So make sure to not have that one up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right, let's move on to Fire Maw. This might be, again, one of the biggest, spookiest ones that some guilds think is the biggest pain point in BWL. I have my own strat here. I'll just air it, and feel free to, make fun of it, because maybe it's insane. I don't know. But, our Fire Maw kill is, let me go ahead and see our Fire Maw kill. Fire Maw takes us
8 minutes, 43 seconds?
2 minutes, 45 seconds. But so what I do on Fire Maw, I got a 99 on it this week, so I don't know, maybe
that's great.
Thanks. But it's weird, I'm SM Ruin, right? This is what I do on Fire Maw, yo. So I pre-pop the Void, I get the bubble, all this, and I tried. I didn't even have a GPP or anything like that, no PI or anything like this. I'll stay there till I get a ton of stacks, and then I'll move to the right and LOS it, of course, right? But this is what I do that I think, because you have time. You're trying to use that time where you're waiting for the stacks to run out productively. So the way I use it productively is I will immediately hard resummon a Voidwalker and sack it, and then I'll have enough time to hard resummon a Voidwalker, tap 4 times, which will bring me back to around full mana, and then I'll go back into the fight with the new Absorb on as well. And that's what I did, just to stop that pushback resistance. And you have to do it in our kill on Fire Maw. We probably have to dodge that, let the stacks drop off like 3 times in total. So I did it like 3 times, sacked, hard resummoned 3 Voidwalkers throughout the fight, and it actually, converted into a pink parse. So I don't know. Maybe
that's pretty good. Although I would say again, it's easier to parse here on a faster clearing guild, obviously, but the goal here to parse very, very well is to be able to let your stacks drop due to fire resistance. So for this specific boss fight, I'll have, with UBRS buff, with Juju Ember and full raid buffs and fire resistance gear. And for this specific boss fight, I use the Dire Maul Warlock class trinket over Briarwood Reed because it has 10 fire resistance.
Ooh, big brain.
And then I also use Blazing Emblem. If I had a tier of Notharian, I would keep using Blazing Emblem, but I would drop the Dire Maul trinket for tier because tier is just too good. But Blazing Emblem is huge here. It gives 15 fire resistance in a trinket slot, which is very, very big for a trinket slot and overall very good. But in addition to that, it has an active use where it increases your fire resistance by, I believe, 50 for a short amount of time. And what you do is, without Blazing Emblem, I usually have around 275 fire resistance for Fire Maul in my fire resistance gear, and that's with full world buffs and everything. And what I'll do is I resist a bunch of the Fire Maul stacks, and you can get high enough fire resistance where you resist the stacks consistently enough that you can just drop your stacks. And what you do with Blazing Emblem is you kind of hold it as a buffer. Anytime you go above 3 or 4 stacks, you can activate your Blazing Emblem and shoot up to like 330 fire resistance, giving you a super, super high probability to drop enough stacks in a row to completely get rid of your debuff.
Hold up, but it's a on-use trinket though, right? So you can't you have to use it 30 seconds after toe up or some shit, right? Like you can't just pop it.
I don't use toe up on that fight.
You don't use toe up on this fight? Is
No.
how bro, how though? You're saying it's this toe up, man, extra flask?
If I could use Toad and stay in, then I will. But if I use Toad and that brings me low enough fire resistance to where I have to move out, then I will not. So I currently do not have all of the fire resistance pieces that we were talking about before. I don't have tier 2 boots. They haven't dropped for us. So if I got some more of the tier 2 pieces that had a little bit of complementary fire resistance, then what I would do is I would drop my Dire Maul trinket and use Toeb, because Toeb is a huge trinket. It's a huge DPS increase. But the whole point here is to have just enough fire resistance to not move out. So once I get maybe tier 2 boots and I get enough fire resistance to not move out, then I'll use Toeb. I want to use Toeb. That's one of the first slots that I'm looking to swap into when I get more fire resistance. But currently speaking, I don't have tier 2 boots. I'm missing some of the pieces.
This man has 600 DPS on Fireball, man. The results don't lie. I think that's insanity to not use Toeb, but it makes sense. I'm actually becoming so woke to fire resist right now talking to you guys. Like, this is just...
I think it's also like the private servers that we are used to, Firemore was not at all this harsh. Like, Firemore is dangerous in BWL. Also that the pushback is so much more punishing. So that's why we like you more or less have all out fire gear. Like, of course you don't do like flat fire gear, but you really need a lot of fire gear. And for sure with progress, the fights, I mean, no one steps out to reset the stacks ever. But in a guild also where you need to step out, actually the fire gear is even better, because like in that way you'll be able to stay in longer. So in a long duration fights, like the more fire gear you have, the better it is, without a doubt. I think also if you play SM Ruin the way that you did, when you step out to hard cast the Voidwalker, that's perfect. So that's for sure a fight where SM Ruin is good for, like, let's say a mid-tier guild or class. I think that one part also to bring up is that on Firemore is one of the few that you ever meet up Firemore to do the curses or corruption. You actually want to wait that one into place. So I don't run in on the tank on this one.
I actually I disagree about the spec. I think Demonic Sacrifice is strictly better here because let's say you're in a guild where it's unavoidable. You're gonna have to move out. When you move out, it is very smart of you to summon another Voidwalker for another shield, less pushback. That is smart. But if you're Demonic Sacrifice, not only will that summon
you can hardcast twice. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, not only will that summon will be...
Ooh, it's stronger too. It's stronger.
Yeah, it'll be faster and it's stronger.
Stronger and faster. Ooh,
but,
man.
But it being faster is actually significant because what you can do when you're line of sight and trying to drop stacks is you can see the animation of Flame Buffet go out on people that are still out taking it. You can see the animation go off. The little fire will flame above their head. And what you can do is you can time the ticks of the Flame Buffet and strafe out in between ticks and get a death coil off or get a shadow burn off.
Bro, I always wanted to have big enough balls to try that, but the stakes are so high, right? It's a GG if you get that, if the stack doesn't fall off. But people are telling me you can do that. Yeah. So you have to wait for it just as soon as you see it hit.
You can do it. Okay. Yes. You have a big enough window to be able to do it. But again, it is a little bit risky. But if you're coming down to, hey, I want to be the best Warlock in my guild, or I want to parse in the world for Warlocks, I want to go for world parses, then those are the things you have to do. And it comes down to you either do it and you play it right, or you don't.
Yep. Interesting, dude. Interesting. Golly.
I so far haven't done it, and the reason is just like dispatching is just so hard on me. So I feel that I will just get upset on it.
If you're going for that pink, you gotta risk it for the biscuit, though.
Well,
man. I'm telling you. Yo, is that what you did on this 594 though, alive or no?
No, I mean you don't reset. So he just said.
That's true. Yeah,
I don't even step out. But the DPS you're looking at on my Fire Maul, I'm not trying to, make any excuses or anything, but the DPS for Fire Maul that I have right now isn't even really good because I'm playing it. I'm testing the waters. I'm playing it more safe than what I have to. That way, I know exactly what fire resistance I need to be able to consistently stay in. And on top of that, again, like I told you before the stream started, some of my parses currently for Blackwing Lair are lower than what I'm used to because I'm not always, but I'm usually the Warlock that we take on to speedruns. And so I've been in a few speedruns lately, and I haven't had Shadow Weaving in my raids. I haven't had Curse of Shadows for a few raids. I haven't had a PI assignment because up until ZG patch, we are prioritizing power infusions over to mages, so my parses are okay right now, but they should be quite good.
They need to all be. It's not even pink parse life. You got to get up to fucking off-white eggshell white parse life. What I was gonna say, bro. At 42 seconds on a Fire Maul kill, can't you just sit there and not even have to worry about, like, even with no FR, like, are you really going to die in 42 seconds if you start with
100%?
Yes.
But what if you did the thing at the very end for the last couple pulses of flame, the Flame Buffet, like, you did the little duck and weave where you just use a coil, shadow burn, and
it would depend on how many seconds it would take afterwards. You just need to account for how many shadow bolts you're losing. So it would really come down to how many seconds you're really losing. But again, even if you went with no fire resistance and you tried to do that duck and weave method, that would mean that you're experiencing more spell pushback during the time that you're in because your absorbs are running out faster as well.
Because your absorbs are running out. True. What if you fell dommed out a void mid-fight and then just took the the succubus... the damage lost for another absorb for tempo. What's that?
That's still not worth it because the Flame Buffet increases the fire damage you take as well. So if you're not dropping your stacks and you think, oh well, I'm gonna stay in and just instantly get another Voidwalker shield and sacrifice the damage from demonic sacrifice.
Doesn't work.
So if you go for that strategy, then you've already accrued so many stacks. You're at 7, 8, 9 stacks. Where your Voidwalker shield is going to be popped within 1 or 2 ticks because you're taking so much increased fire damage that each tick is just going to obliterate your shield.
I think 40 seconds, I mean, I don't know, man. You're the big brain here, but 40 seconds, I think you can make it, bro. What if you didn't use a mana potion, use a health potion or something, too? Like,
Yes.
Oh, no, yeah, that's what, GPP or something. Like, you think you would really die in 40 seconds? And what if you died, but you died in a pool of blazing glory, and you said you died like 2 seconds before the boss?
Well, then
I don't know.
You're not going to parse on Ebon Rock. You're not going to parse on Flame Gore. You're ruining the whole rest of the raid for yourself.
It's true. It's only 40 seconds, though. Okay. Anyway, this is really
it's a very fast kill, but I would go for 0 fire resist items if we killed it in like 25 it's somewhere between 25 and 30 seconds. Then I would start pushing for no fire resist items. I would still use like Bloodvine legs with fire resist. I would still use like buffs like Juju Ember. I would use UBRS buff and things like that. But I wouldn't go for items like Blazing Emblem or things like that if we were killing it in 25, 26, 27 seconds.
I see. Blazing Emblem is just right there at that sweet spot where it's barely worth it, sort of like it's needed. Yeah.
As we kill it faster and faster and faster, I'll need less fire resistance items because I'll experience less ticks of the flame buffet. But as it currently stands, even with a 45 second or 46 second or whatever kill time, is if it's 50 seconds, 45 seconds, anything like that, you need some fire resistance.
I see. Okay.
Just dropping stacks is very, very important.
Okay.
And I think the last thing to add on Fire Maw is that I wouldn't say that it's super sketchy on threat on this one, but you can get crit streaks you actually can pull aggro, because on the drakes you do crazy damage. Also, of course, if the tanks that happened to me 2 raids ago eats a wing buffet, then I got teleported and fucked, and that was not so fun. So I think just because also that you pre-pop a fire pot and that you pop one in mid-fight, you actually cannot use lips. So Fire Maw is a bit sketchy, but not at all as sketchy as Broodlord.
I see.
You can't lip there, yeah.
The other thing is just bandage on CD too. It's just free heal whenever if you're in one of those guilds where you can't stay in, you might as well and have multiple ranks of Hellspawn too. You just have to have a lower rank. You don't have to.
Also, something that kind of goes for all of the Drake bosses for the most part, they're all tauntable. So it's not really that bad if you pull threat. Obviously, you don't want to consistently be pulling threat, but if you pull threat, just make sure you don't pull threat during a shadow flame breath. Then you're in trouble. But generally speaking, I personally don't think pulling threat is that big of a deal on the Drakes, but I could be a bit biased just because our tanks have good reaction time.
Yeah.
So if I know that I'm pulling threat,
you trust
then
in your tanks. Yeah.
It's not a big deal. It's going to be taunted back in a second.
Real quick, Dive has a question real quick from the Warlock Discord. The Warlock Chief Administrator of the Warlock Discord, Big Dive. He says, is it possible to make a weak aura at a time to flame buffet pulses? Probably, right?
I would assume so. There's weak auras out there to time like lava jumping, for example. So I would say that if you could time that, you could time flame buffet pulses. The flame buffet pulses, all you would have to do is look at a VOD, and you could easily determine the interval of time.
On private we did have that one, so
yeah.
Classic works a bit differently. I think also one thing to add on this one, pulling threat, is that actually you get teleported. So I've been able to get teleported on Razor Gore, Fire Maw, and Ebon Rock. And you can actually survive the teleport too. But in Classic, you actually get teleported by these ones, which is a bit annoying and stressful.
Are you talking about the wing buffet?
No. So if you pull aggro on Razor Gore, Fire Maw, or Ebon Rock, I guess that also goes for Flame Gore, the boss teleports you into melee range.
And that's Classic exclusive? I've never experienced that.
It's not on private, it's Classic thing. So in that way, I've been able to pull 20, if I say like that.
Okay.
And if you're really, really fast, you can actually jump and survive it, but normally you also get one-shotted. The good part, at least, is that Fire Maw then don't come out into the raid. Because it actually, you get teleported, so it sticks.
Interesting. I've not seen that.
When GR blown up your spot, man. He says we have that weak aura in progress, so Live just doesn't have it installed. That's funny, man.
Wait, who said that?
WinGR/Zach in the YouTube channel. I'm not sure if he's in progress. Anyway, let's blast this. We have 24 minutes to get through 3 bosses or 4 bosses, but these are just Drakes, so not too bad. 2-minute thoughts on Ebon Rock each. Actually, you have 100 on Ebon Rock, I think. Actually, let me see. Ebon Rock. No, 99. You have a small brain, 99 pink parse.
We should take the trash before we go to Ebon Rock, though. And I think just going it super quickly is that as a caster, you need to prioritize the Warlocks always. I actually normally go for like the X-Mark Warlock, but in Classic, it's kind of rare that it's summoned, so you don't need to be as needy. Also, of course, you want to put up like a corruption or immolate and try to get out vulnerability. I think it's very smart actually to have a Shadow Bolt rank 1, because if they are Shadow vulnerable and you put up a corruption, they will come to you. But if you do a Shadow Bolt rank 1, they will not come to you. So in that way, you are a bit protected. But on these ones, like, I'm pumping damage as a madman. So I think I had like double threat on the Vimkins at the same time, etc. Like you just go able. I don't think we need to say so much more. It is good to do Rain of Fire on the goblins if you can, but they seem to die kind of quickly also. So maybe it's not. It's better to prioritize on Warlocks. But if you want to pump logs, you should go on the vulnerabilities on the Vimkins and on the goblins.
Gotcha. Good point.
I don't know, Alive, you want to add anything on it?
Well, I think that we could just go over. We don't have to go through every trash pack. We can just go over what you should do for a typical techie pack pull and a typical triple wormkin pull. And let's say a typical techie pack pull is 2 warlocks, because there's more trash packs with techies that have 2 warlocks than there are 1, and 1 spellbinder. Let's just say that's the average techie pack pull, and 1 wormkin. I would say always get your curse down on the warlocks and focus the warlocks so you don't get any summoning portals. And this is more important in slow clearing guilds than it is in fast clearing guilds, because on private servers, if the warlock got a portal down, then the portal would not despawn when the warlock died. But on classic, the portal will despawn if the warlock died before the demon came out. So you have a little bit more leeway on classic with you than you did before. But if you're in a slow clearing guild, it is very, very important to not let a demon spawn out of the portal. So you focus the warlocks, and then you have 2 options after the warlock dies. You can either A, go onto the wormkin, or B, AoE the techie packs. Usually, the techie packs are going to be tanked by a mage. And if the mage is doing the techie pack tanking correctly, he can take essentially no damage. So you have one person tanking 1 pack of mobs, taking little to no damage, and then you have a tank tanking a wormkin, taking little to moderate damage. So the wormkin is doing more damage output to the raid than the techie packs are, as long as everything is being handled correctly. So what it really comes down to is, how do I deal the most damage off of these packs? And the answer is after the warlocks die, you want to immediately check the wormkin and see if it's fire or shadow. And the tank is going to have enough threat on it to not have to use rank 1 spells to check. You can use max rank spells because you focused the warlocks first. So the tank will have enough threat for you to check with max rank. So you want to immediately check. And what I do is I'll go for a corruption immolate, and you want to have some sort of combat text log, MSBT or some add-on like that, so you know which of your dots are actually receiving amplified damage. And if the wormkin is shadow or fire vulnerable, then it is most efficient for you to not AoE the techies and focus on the wormkin, and leave the melee or the mages or whatever casters cannot do those vulnerabilities to kill the techies. If you do not have shadow or fire vulnerability, it is more beneficial for you to AoE the techies down.
And you just Rain of Fire, right? Because Hellfire too dangerous.
Correct.
Yeah, you kind of said exactly what I said. I think adding to that, if you get aggro on the Warlock, make sure to pop Shadow Ward. Actually, that's one ability that's very good in this occasion, because the Shadow Balls do hit a lot, but the Shadow Ward makes that you take no damage.
Well, you could always pop it before you even do the pull, though.
Sure. But I think guilds mainly drag them through the rooms, and they run a lot, etc. But remember to get up your dots very early, especially if you don't touch them. Just get your dots up and then run down.
Also, there's, depending on how you pull some of the techie packs, sometimes you'll see the wormkins before you even see the warlocks come in range. In which case, if the wormkin comes in range before the warlocks, it won't hurt to check the wormkin with the rank 1s real quick, just so you know ahead of time what vulnerability.
Yep.
Anyways,
Gotcha.
we can move on to
Ebon Rock, the
triple
hardest
Wormkin
boss. Oh, the triple.
Okay,
Oh yeah,
okay.
true. No. You're right. The Wormkin pack. Let's do that. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
for the triple Wormkin packs, there is actually a weak aura that will automatically show the vulnerability on Chromagus or these Wormkins the second it is known to the raid. But what you want to do is, upon the pull, if it isn't already detected, you want to check the mobs with a rank 1 spell. And then after you check the mobs, there's 3 different things that you want to pay attention to. 1, is the tank spinning on the target that I can do damage to? If the tank is spinning on a fire or shadow vulnerable mob, you cannot DPS it. Number 2, if the tank is stunned, normally the tank can pop a free action potion and avoid the AoE stun that the Wormkins can do. However, if sometimes the tank has potion cooldown, maybe it's an off tank that's a Fury DPS and used a Mighty Rage potion recently. If they're stunned, don't go on the mob. And 3, if the tank is not stunned and not spinning, then you can DPS. However, let's say that 2 out of the 3 mobs do have a vulnerability that you can damage, Shadow or Fire or Fire Shadow. Then to help mitigate your threat, what is best is to put an Immolate up on the Fire one, swap to the Shadow, put a Corruption up on the Shadow one, and if you have Curse of Elements assignment, you don't even have to put Curse of Elements up. You can just put Curse of Agony up on the Shadow one. And then you want to swap your hard casts back and forth. You want to go back to the Fire one, do a Searing Pain or an Immolate, depending on your threat. Swap back to the Shadow one, do a Shadow Bolt. Swap back to the Fire one. Or the same thing with Shadow or Fire. You want to swap in between targets instead of just nuking one to help disperse your threat as much as you can while doing maximum damage output.
No, that's big brain. I do that all the time. Swapping back and forth between targets to mitigate threat. That's like a Warlock essential right there for those of you guys listening.
Yeah, and I think to Alive's point, I agree with everything. I think open up with that rank 1 Shadow Bolt. I always do on the 3 targets. If you're really coordinated, you can have 1 each. Actually, the mage should do a rank 1 Flame Strike on all the 3 when they run. In that way, you will have checked the fire already from the get-go. Otherwise, I actually do full cast Immolate on them, which is a bit sketchy, but a Corruption is much worse, as I see it. We mentioned it very early in this podcast, but if, let's say, 2 targets are Arcane, for example, and there's only Fire one, and the Fire one has kind of loose aggro, do an Immolate and then down rank 1 step with Immolate, and then you spam Immolate instead of going Immolate Searing Pain, because if you do Immolate Searing Pain, you will just pull aggro. And on this one, like, you need to juggle lips. Like, I think that I was juggling 2 at the same time, and then you jump up and down, and you know, it's a bit panic mode. You don't want to do that because you kind of fuck the whole raid in that way. So it's a bit also having patience, because remember, like, a Shadow Bolt can crit for like 7-8k on this one, and pressing your Searing Pain, you will pull threat super fast.
Also, typically, not always. There are some emergency situations, but typically your paladins will also have Blessing of Protection off cooldown here, in case you want to use that grace period once again to finish off one of these mobs if they're at 30%, 20% health.
Gotcha. All right, let's move on to Ebon Rock. There's some really good.
Typically, you push aggro in the end. Like, I'm never afraid of getting aggro in the last part, but then I need to know they will die before it reaches me.
I think 95 or 99% of Warlocks out there have never used that strat before with the max rank Immolate, then down rank it just for the instant damage on Immolate. That is just mind blowing right now. I'm actually going to try that out, man. That's huge brain right there.
Yep.
Let's move on to Ebon Rock. So Ebon Rock, not too much to this fight, sort of tank and spank. What do you guys think about this?
It's spooky. You pull aggro.
Yeah, I mean, generally speaking, there's not many mechanics that you're really concerned about other than threat. The only mechanic you really need to pay attention to is what is my threat. But other than that, Ebon Rock is a tank and spank, so you're just going to follow you're going to follow the rules for any given 1 versus 1 tank and spank scenario, which would be wait for 5 stacks of Shadow Weaving, before you pop your talisman and go for PI. You want to try to time your corruption. That way you have a corruption up going in to your talisman and PI, and then it ends. Your corruption falls off when your talisman and PI have like 1 second or 0 seconds left would be perfect, so that you can immediately apply another corruption on the very, very, very tail end of your buffs
Snapshot,
to get another, so you can snapshot it and get another amplified one.
Love that.
And then other than that, it's pretty much just the normal rules that you want to run by for any single target scenario. The most ideal way to end the boss fight is to go from Shadow Bolt into Death Coil Shadow Burn, and you always want to go Coil into Shadow Burn and not Shadow Burn into Coil, because you have the travel time of the coil before the damage register.
I think last part to add on this one is that the drakes actually do much more damage than what we are used to. So tanks would typically use sword and shield or dagger and shield, which means that they will not dual wield tank, which means they will do a bit less threat. Of course, you get a lot of threat on this one, so it shouldn't be a problem. But one thing that you could ask for is actually that the tanks try to rotate the taunts and like have 100% rage, and then get aggro and then dump it and then get taunted back. So some guilds actually do that, like you circulate it and whichever gets aggro like builds it on. I think it's good to taunt away the wing buffet. But then you want your third tank to also have some aggro without having the wing buffet to dump rage. So you can kind of maximize the threat even more. But I would say kind of few guilds are doing it. Depends also on your kill time, of course.
Yeah. All right. Let's move on to Flame Gore, another seemingly tank and spank type thing. Anything juicy here with Flame Gore?
Pretty much all the same rules apply. The only thing that can kind of interrupt you here is the AoE fire ability that Flame Gore has, in case your hunters are a little bit slow on their trank shot rotation. So it is possible to have a greater fire protection potion pre-popped. However, you don't want to pop a greater fire protection potion during this fight or before this fight, because you want a major mana potion. So the time that you would have to be popping it is during the techie pack pulls in the hallway right before the ramp going up to Ebon Rock, or when you're doing the triple Wormkin pack. The point is you want to have it pre-popped, because you want to be able to use a major mana potion on Ebon Rock, and you want to be able to use a major mana potion on Flame Gore. But if you have one pre-popped for Flame Gore, it is going to be beneficial, just so you get a little bit less knockback from the AoE pulse, in case your hunters are a little bit slow.
Okay.
And I think also one part that we didn't really touch on, that typically if you have a fast clear, you do want to use PI on Ebon Rock, so it's up for Chromagus, and you miss out of Flame Gore. If you're really lucky and really lucky but it's slow, you actually maybe can use it on all three, but typically that's how it turns out.
Yeah, I think
Flame Gore actually is the one that you can crit even harder on. I don't know really why, if the shadow resistance is lower, but it's always been where it's like the craziest DPS you can ever do is on Flame Gore. So be that aware. Like pulling threat on it actually is pretty easy.
This is actually the 100 that you have alive. 675 on Flame Gore. Somehow you did more to Ebon Rock though. You did almost 800 DPS on Ebon Rock.
I mean, both of these fights are kind of just RNG. In my experience, Ebon Rock gives a lot more partial resistances, which would ensue that Ebon Rock has higher shadow resistance. But both of these boss fights are just come down to RNG. It's just a single target tank and spank. The faster you kill the boss, the better, because that means a higher percent uptime on your talisman and on your PI. I'm actually surprised I have 100 on this. I really think my logs overall have not been nearly as good as what they could be. I also am not that geared overall, but I'm impressed that I have 100 on this one, actually.
Yeah, that's legit, dude. That's legit. I'm actually really excited to hear your Nefarian perspective, dude, because my Nef is kind of scuffed, and you have a fucking rank 11 Nef kill. We're getting there soon, though, boys. We're getting there super soon.
I just want to say one thing, though. Like, I think that these ones are good to compare, etc., etc., but, like, I never value boss ranks compared to full run, including trash. So to me, the way that I only value is trash plus boss damage, because that's how you contribute to the guild the most, and also for speed clear. So, and unfortunately on classic logs or Warcraft logs, there is no full runs comparisons, right? There is only on bosses, which makes the wall side kind of, in my part, not as lucrative, if I could say.
Yeah.
So I like to kind of compare on full runs on that log and look into how you did towards other classes instead, or other warlocks.
I agree. Most of the people in our guild don't really care about strict boss logs. Every single time we post logs in our Discord, it's always trash plus boss, because that really allows you to see what players are actually performing well. Because you could be doing little to no trash damage and just cheesing bosses, and that kind of entices people to play more greedy and do things that are not actually good for the raid.
Yeah.
Just so that they can pump on the bosses. So I do wish that Warcraft logs had some sort of division where it included trash plus boss and ranked people that way, but unfortunately, to my knowledge, they don't.
Yeah.
I mean, me and Alive are pretty greedy, but we are not crazy greedy. Maybe we are doing some things that are pushing on logs, but at least I would say that our overview, and my in particular, is like, I only care about trash and boss. Like I would,
same.
I can check on something, but won't like change my playstyle to maximize on a boss.
No, it makes sense.
Yeah.
That's truly like the big brain way to look at it, right? So everybody's playing kind of. It aligns the incentive so you don't play selfishly, because this does encourage selfish play. Agreed. It is still spicy to look at the big fat numbers, though, but it makes a lot of sense. All right.
So, I mean, Chromagus, I personally feel is my hardest boss that I still... Like, I think it's hard to fully nail it. And the reasoning on that one is that you're really walking on the edge of the world. And if you do one micro misstep, you fall over in one or another sense. So the typical is that you pull aggro because you did like a crazy 10k Shadowbolt crit. The other part is that you don't shoot that Shadowbolt, but you kind of lay off too long. And when I say lay off, is that you're like, oh shit, I'm going to pull threat, and you stop your cast. And then you kind of wait 1 or 2 seconds and start again, where actually you should have started the cast directly again. Because like you need to be directly under the tank's threat at all points, and it's super hard when you do 10k in a chunk. So Chromagus is, at least for me, probably the hardest one to fully maximize. Of course, in a guild like Progress, it's easier because it would be like 2 to 3 vulnerabilities and then it's dead. So in that way, it's kind of like you get the vulnerability and then you just blast. But it is hard, and especially also that you need to wait for the first breath, because if the first breath is time lapse, you're kind of fucking the guild quite a bit, and then you kind of need to eat the time lapse. And it can be good to also know that when you intentionally eat the time lapse, there is a risk of resisting it, and then you need to lip. And I have failed on that at some occasions.
Yeah, I remember that.
And I was very angry. I actually didn't encounter for it being resisted, so I was like, because in our guild people are kind of hard on each other, and I think even more so on Warlocks, just because Warlocks, they know like control your damage, you don't know how to play, and me and Alive for sure want to pump and try to perform. And then when you take the time lapse but you resist it, then you need to leap fast.
My Horde Warlock brothers, we know that feel, man. Like it's so easy to trash on the Warlocks. Like, it just happens all the time, and you get like a bad rap.
Warlocks are really easy to blame because they're the most dependent class. You cannot reach your full potential if you have a bad healer. You can't reach your full potential if you have a bad tank. You can't reach your full potential if your tank's gear isn't good enough. There's a lot of different factors that go into play and towards reaching your potential. And the same thing can be said for Chromagus. I mean, if you're playing Chromagus absolutely frame perfect, you're doing absolute simulated perfection, then you're still playing very, very dangerously, because you need to be able to utilize your invulnerabilities to be able to pump on shadow vulnerabilities. You need to be able to line of sight the breath at the very, very last second. You need to be able to fit in. Let's say that the breath is coming in 2 seconds. Okay, I don't have enough time for Shadow Bolt, but I do have enough time to get a Death Coil Shadow Burn off, because I know that's going to give me a 1.5 second global, and I can get that off right as I line of sight. And line of sighting too much. You don't want to run line of sight too much, because then you're gimping your DPS on the runtime trying to get back into line of sight. How fast you can swap your wands during vulnerabilities. How fast can you swap to a nature wand or frost or an arcane wand?
Oh my god, that's fucking big brain. I never did that. Wait, how many wands do you have? Is it worth? But wait.
Well, you don't need a fire wand and you don't need a shadow wand, but the best arcane wand you can get is Essence Gatherer from Blackmoon Lair Trash.
That's worth using though?
Yes, 1000%. Yes.
No.
I mean, I think a Shadow Bolt on a Wormkin or Chromagos, when it's like on a Wormkin, because they actually are resistant against other elements, I think. Like a Shadow Bolt does like 300, 350 for me right now, where actually the wand is doing like 450, but also you have a very high attack speed.
Yeah.
Yo, so, hold up. Walk me through like a quick, just okay. You pulled Chromagus. You're alive. You're sitting there. You fucking had a rank 232 in the world parse on Chromagus. Like, what is just make a simulation here, like of how it would play out, like just the
right as we tank Chromagus right where he stands in the gateway, and we line of sight around the gate to the left right there. So right as Chromagus comes out of the gate, he's not going to do his breath. So I can stand directly in front of him, and we're not going to know his vulnerability until someone in our raid checks it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start off by casting a rank 1 Immolate into a rank 1 Shadow Burn.
Do you really though? You actually do that?
Yes.
That would feel so bad. I feel like I'd be so far behind if I did that.
I do Shadow Bolt rank 1, and I just count on mages doing the fire.
That's what I do, bro.
Well, mages will always check Frost first, because Frost will give them the most damage. You could be hyper organized and say, okay, this mage check fire, this mage check Frost, but most guilds aren't going to be that hyper organized. So a lot of the people that are listening to the channel aren't going to be in that situation. They're going to be in the situation where they have to check. So if you're standing right as the gates open, Chromagus is right there, he just becomes targetable for the very first instant, then I would check with a rank 1 Immolate, and I would start with Immolate. That way you can get the GCD ticking as you're casting the Immolate into a rank 1 Shadow Burn. You could probably even do a little bit higher rank Shadow Burn or Immolate, depending on how good your tank's threat is at the beginning of the fight. You could do like rank 3 Shadow Burn and Immolate, something like that. But you want to do a safe rank to be able to check. And then once you find out what the vulnerability is, if it's fire, you start spamming Immolate, and you do the Immolate trick that we said before. You do a max rank Immolate to get the data, and then you start spamming lower rank Immolates depending on what your threat is, preferably 1 rank lower. But if your threat starts climbing even higher because your tank is not that geared or whatever reason it may be, you can go down in ranks. If your tank has a lot of threat, then you do max rank Immolate into max rank Searing Pain until you have high threat. If it's Shadow when it first comes out, then that's also very dangerous for the first vulnerability to be Shadow, because that means you can't really cast a Shadow Bolt right away, because if that Shadow Bolt crits, you're totally screwed. So what you have to do instead is instead of doing a Shadow Bolt right away, you just put a max rank Corruption up, because Corruption's going to do a lot of damage, but by the time the Corruption reaches its first tick, your tank's threat will out-threat the damage that the Corruption's going to do. And then you can determine where to go from there depending on what your tank's threat is. Generally speaking, if you cast a Shadow Bolt after the Corruption and it doesn't crit, you're safe. If it does crit, you're probably screwed. So you want to start off with either A, a Shadow Burn, or B, just doing like 1 rank of Shadow Bolt under or 2 ranks of Shadow Bolt under, and then kind of feeling out the threat. But you really don't... It's not really too good for it to be Shadow or Fire right away.
Okay.
you'll get the most
We'll just
damage.
play one out, for example. So he goes, what, fire first?
If it goes okay, so if the gate's open and it goes fire first,
Yeah.
I would do do I know it's fire?
Yeah, you know it's fire.
Or am I checking?
It's fire. No,
Okay.
you don't even have to check. It's say you have a weak aura or something like that. You just know it's fire. Let's just play it
So
out.
since I have a very geared and reliable tank, I would just go straight into spamming max rank Immolate because my tank does enough threat where that is safe. Although he probably would not do enough threat if it's fire right away, he would probably not do enough threat for me to do max rank Immolate into Searing Pain.
Okay.
Since it's the very, very
But
first
you could adapt
vulnerability.
on the fly if it looked like you had a
Correct.
huge threat lead or something, then you switch over to
Correct.
Searing Pain. Okay.
If he started climbing up, I would just stop casting Immolate and cast Searing Pain. But if I saw that I'm gaining threat around the same rate as he is, I would just stick to Immolate. And if I'm gaining threat at a faster rate than he is, then you want to do the Immolate trick where you're doing max rank and then starting to cast down ranks.
Dude, this is fucking big. That feel when you realize you've been playing a video game like totally incorrectly for this shit. This is like mind blowing right now. I need to go to BWL.
A lot of
And
people.
Yep.
God.
A lot of people say that Classic WoW is very, very simple. DPS rotations are very simple. However, there's always going to be... If you look at it from the outside and just look at a generalized standpoint, then yes, it is very simple. But there's always going to be ways for you to min-max and shine more than the guy next to you. And since the game is more simplistic in DPS rotation, the things that you have to utilize, the tricks that you have to utilize to get one step ahead are very, very min-maxy, very, very minute, and things that you constantly have to be taken advantage of to be able to be consistently better than everyone else.
Okay. So let's just keep playing it out. It's fire first, and then what happens? What happens? How does it unfold?
Okay, so it's probably going to change vulnerability before the first breath if it's immediately fire. So I would just keep doing what I said before. Immolate if you have high threat, Searing Pain if you have low threat, and so on and so on. As soon as it changes, if it's Shadow and I have high threat, then I would immediately go for a Corruption first because your dots, even though they're empowered, are not going to generate more threat than the tank is. And if your dots are generating more threat than the tank, then your tank has some serious issues, either gear-wise or playstyle-wise. And if you have Curse of Elements, you can immediately swap into Curse of Agony. That way, if you have to hide, you still have dots ticking. And if it's Shadow, you and the breath is coming. Let's say it goes from fire directly into Shadow, and you have 7 seconds until the first breath comes out. Then you don't want to hard cast a Shadow Bolt. It might be too dangerous. You can just do a Shadow Burn into a Death Coil, or dot Corruption, Curse of Agony, Death Coil, Shadow Burn, Line of Sight right before the breath goes out.
And I mean, I do it a bit differently in the way that I typically do not do Shadow Burn and Death Coil. I'm more like just running, waiting, and then try to get in the Shadow Bolt. But I would say that what Alive says is, like, you can probably fuck yourself harder with it, to be honest. That you just do Shadow Burn and you just jump up on threat so you actually pull aggro. But it's more safe because a Shadow Bolt is like, if it crits or not crits, it's such a big variance. So that's a big, like, Shadow Burn and Death Coil are more stable. So if you're used to that, I would recommend it. I think the way I'm doing it is not as good, if I can say it like that.
So this is kind of the same thing as Razor Gore. There's a spell priority list. For fire, you want to be casting Max Rank Immolate and Searing Pain. That is your top priority. That's what you want to be doing. However, if the conditions don't fit that, then you have to go to priority number 2. And priority number 2 would be Max Rank Immolate for the dot and then spamming lower rank Immolate. So it's sort of a priority thing. You want to be doing the priority number 1 that yields the most DPS.
Well, no, priority 1 is max immo Searing Pain. Priority 2 is max immo down rank. Or no, priority 2 is just max immo spam only. And then priority 3 is max immo down rank immo.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah, okay.
And then the same thing.
I would say though that even if it's fire on the first, I would still put up a Corruption. So that's what I normally do. I don't know if you do that Alive, but I would have put it up.
It depends. It depends on how fast you find out the vulnerability. To be honest, but still, even for Shadow, like the most ideal situation, priority number 1 is put your dots up and spam Shadow Bolt. That's the best situation that you can put yourself in. However, there's factors that limitate you. You might be high in threat, so you can't cast. You can't fit that situation. Or the breath is coming up, so you can't fit that situation. You have to line of sight, and on your way to line of sight, you can cast instant cast spells and so on. So it's kind of like Razor Gore, where you want to be doing the highest priority stuff, and if the situation doesn't warrant that or doesn't allow you to do that, then you move to priority number 2. And if the situation doesn't warrant that, you move down to priority number 3.
Also,
and so
use
on.
Sapper. Someone mentioned for fire. Forgot about the shit. Yeah.
If the boss is being tanked close enough for you to be in range, yeah. Sapper. Yeah, you don't want to spend too much time running into place to get your Sapper off. But if the boss is like right around the corner and you're in range, then yeah, sure.
Okay.
And I mean, the CD also that you will have is that you must much likely have used your Sapper in suppression room. It might be so that it comes up. I would say that in a progress like speed run, it should probably have come up to Chromagus, but you do want to save your Sapper for Nefarian's ads, so you don't want to use it on Chromagus regardless.
Yeah, but that's in a normal guild. It's going to be up in time.
I see.
Yeah.
So then, what is this nature and arcane rotation? Like, you're actually using a wand right now. Like, this is no meme. Like, you on this fight or one of these parts is we're actually using a nature or an arcane wand.
So the best thing you can do. Okay, so let me test you real quick. Okay.
All right.
Yeah, let's test everyone in chat.
All right.
What is the biggest DPS upgrade that you can get for a glove enchant in Blackwing Lair? What's the best DPS glove enchant for Blackwing Lair? Hellspawn, I think you know this one.
DPS increase?
I leave it for the rest.
I mean, I don't know, man. The chat's saying agility? Minor mount speed, that's what I have on mine, yo. I'm not gonna lie, I have minor mount speed off my gloves right now.
The best stat that you can get on your gloves is
agility.
Plus 2 fits.
Agility doesn't affect wand in classic though. That's the thing though.
Oh, does it not?
No, it doesn't. It doesn't. Not on. It's private server thing. But it's still
okay. Never mind. I thought it was still affecting it.
In private server though, I see where you're going with this.
Yeah.
I see
a wand is considered a projectile. A wand hit is considered a projectile hit on private servers. So agility would give it crit chance. So all right, but still, the best wands that you can use, use for arcane would be Essence Gatherer.
Essence Gatherer for arcane. Okay.
If you haven't seen an Essence Gatherer or your healers,
where does it drop at?
BWL.
Blackwing Lair trash. Blackwing Lair trash.
Oh, okay.
It's like 85 DPS or something.
So if you haven't been able to get one of those, you can just use Bone Creeper Stylus from Shoulder.
Oh yeah, that's arcane. I have that. Everybody has that.
And then
it's the second best for Shadow, but best tier.
Bro, you have to help me out here. You're telling me that using Bone Creeper Stylus on Chromagus is going to do more damage than my fat Shadow Bolt crits.
Yes. It attacks faster and does more damage.
Oh my god, bro.
And, okay, so for Frost, you can, obviously the best wand you can get is Cold Snap, but you're never going to get Cold Snap as a Warlock. That's just not going to happen. So instead of Cold Snap, you can use the Alteric Valley Frost Channeling Wand, I believe it's
So
called.
the rotation for all these, though, is you still maintain Corruption or whatever your dots are, right? And then you just wand.
Well, it's better for you to... The only reason you would keep up your dots is so that you can check a vulnerability the moment it happens.
Yeah.
So you would still want to keep up a Corruption, but it's not as much for the DPS. It's more so that you want to have it up and checked right away when a vulnerability changes.
But you would have it up though, right? So you would just keep the Corruption running, and then you would just wand.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then for Nature Wand, the best one that you can get is What's it called? I always forget the name of the one. The one from Eastern Plaguelands quest chain, the PvP one.
Oh, I have that one, the stamina one. Storm Ranger. Storm Ranger.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
But when Zul'Gurub comes out, there's actually a hidden OP item that a lot of people just disenchant. And off of the Spider Priestess, she drops a wand called Meryl's Touch. And it is by far the best poisoned wand that you can get at that tier of content. It attacks extremely fast and does really high DPS. And speed is actually a significant factor in Chromagus because that means that you can time your line of sight a little bit better with your wand attack auto attack timing whenever a breath goes out.
So you're telling me there's a reason that you can get these so you can be up in the running for these wands, because the wands we always just give them to like the healers and people that want them in our raid, like, you know, people.
Yeah, I mean, even for the healers, this is something that they could do, because as a priest you can't do fire damage, right?
Yeah.
But in Molten Core, a lot of people are just disenchanting the fire wand Crimson Shocker. No one needs it. Who gives a crap? But as a priest, if you're trying to min-max damage and you don't have any healing that you need to do, obviously you want to prioritize dispelling. You want to prioritize whatever your job is for the fight. But if you don't need to dispel, if you have downtime, then you could still min-max your wand damage. You could have a Frost Wand. You could have Crimson Shocker for fire damage. You could have some Shadow Wand. There's a bunch of different options, honestly. Skull's Touch, etc.
Apparently, Dad wants to bring up that in Suppression Room, Curse of Tongues does not work on the Dragonkin or the Orcs.
Correct.
Good to know.
You can't kick it. You can't slow its cast. Nothing like that. Okay. You could on private servers. You could counterspell them too.
Yeah.
But you can't hear. You can't hear.
But I would also say that I think there are a couple of things for the wands too. Like having a really strong wand like Essence Gatherer is actually worth when you're just getting your shards. So the way I'm doing it is like you dot up, you do a Shadow Bolt, but then when you get into melee on you, I want to perfect it in with the Soul Drain, just because Soul Drain is so crap in Classic because of the pushbacks. So I think like you should have good ones. But for Chromagus to bring these ones, that's actually worth. I think that, I don't know, I haven't figured it out, but I have some add-on problems. I don't know if it's like the standard add-on, but I cannot really swap add-ons, swap wands. I don't know if you have some good add-on for it, Alive? Because I actually have big problems that it doesn't swap in combat.
I feel that
there's a global on it, right? There's a 1.5 second global, so maybe
It's the wand auto attack produces kind of a weird global that kind of can interrupt your swapping. You need to swap like at the perfect time, or else it's kind of scuffed a little bit.
Yeah, but I think there should be some add-on also helping you with it, to be honest. And for me, it gets stuck, so I don't know why, but it's weird.
So if you were to do BWL right now, and he was about to be nature vulnerable, Scout's Honor, you're swapping to your good old trusty Storm Rager, and you're slapping Chromagus with the Storm Rager. Yeah. Scout's Honor.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, I'm about to do Blackwing Lair right now.
Oh my!
You can
God.
pull up. You can pull up. So on my YouTube channel, I have a video that I recently uploaded where I brought out the Frost Wand and just started back.
This cracks me up.
And I mean,
I can't wait.
Like, the top mages are doing the same, so they swap into when it's Shadow and when it's Nature vulnerability too.
Yeah.
So it goes for mages too, and
we do it on the Wormkin packs as well. If the Wormkin packs is like Nature, Arcane, then the mages go on the Arcane one, and we just sit there and wand the Nature one, or whatever wand is the highest damage. Like, if you have Storm Rager and you have Essence Gatherer, then you would go for the Arcane. But if ZG comes out and you get Meryl's Touch, then you would go for the Poison, because Meryl's Touch does more damage.
Do you remember this parse on Chromagus? Did you actually swap wands on this, you think? I mean...
Which parse?
You did 700 damage, 700 DPS.
We ended that parse with a Shadow vulnerability. I don't remember what the vulnerability... I think we had a Frost vulnerability earlier, I want to say. I don't remember exactly all the vulnerabilities for that specific parse. I just know we had one Shadow vulnerability. But if we only had one Shadow vulnerability, we usually have 3 vulnerabilities on average, then I definitely swapped wands. I probably used a Wand of Biting Cold or something like that.
Damn, dude. All right. Anything last things on Chromagus? Anything you guys think of, or should we go Neff?
Always pay attention to time lapse. If you don't know what both of the breaths are, let's say you saw the first breath come out and it's anything other than time lapse, and you're starting to pump your threat, it's fire vulnerable or shadow vulnerable or some sort of damage that you can do, fire or shadow, and you're pumping threat and you get really high threat, then it's really, really important that you pay attention to the second breath. If you go to hide before the second breath and you see Chromagus is casting time lapse, then you have to immediately move out if you're above the second tank in threat. Because the first tank is going to eat the time lapse. He's going to be frozen in time. So it's going to go to the second highest person in threat. If that's you, you're screwed. So it's really, really important that if you're pumping damage, it's totally okay to be second in threat under the tank. It's totally okay. But if you see time lapse coming, you have to have really, really fast reaction time if you're second in threat. And you have to run out and eat the time lapse with the main tank, or else it'll go for you and kill you in one hit.
I see. Yeah.
And I think adding on that is that on the free pack of Wimkins before it, it's good if you can chill a bit and not have to push your lip. Because if you get time lapse and those mechanics, it's really important to be able to lip in case it comes from you.
Yeah.
Alright. Do we go to the final boss of Blackwing Lair, ladies and gentlemen? None other than Nefarian. The final boss, man. This is one that is rough for me. Let me check mine real quick. I think mine is scuffed. But you have a rank 11 part. Oh no, I got a 95. Not bad. But anyway,
so
sorry.
One thing to start off the bat that actually I think it seems like a lot of people are doing wrong in Classic is that you should actually start your fight in the middle. So you should actually stand like on the typical buff spot and not stand on left and right. And the reason for this is that you want to get the colors called out. So you don't want to be on the side where it's black and where it's red, because that's shadow and fire. More or less, they are not immune, but they are heavily having high resistance. So you want to go on colors that are like blue, yellow, green. So that's number one. So like the way that we have always done it is that we have our casters in the middle, and then it gets called out like mages left, the warlocks right, or something like that. Because you'd never have a side. Can they even have black and red? That like those are combined, right?
Yeah. You can have black on one side and red on the other. Very rarely. But actually, the best way to call it out is you want to have a warlock assigned to each cubby, so that they can put Curse of Recklessness up. In our guild, we killed the little... Yeah. It's a DPS increase. Yeah, it's a DPS increase.
Isn't both Razorgore and Nefarian phase 1s a set timer? It has nothing to do with your kill speed, right?
Well, for Nefarian, you... Especially in guilds that are clearing it slower and not instantly popping the mobs, it's important to at least get the Curse of Recklessness up on the Chromatic mob. Because the Chromatic mob, you're going to have such high resistance on it anyway, and you really, really don't want your melee to fall behind. In our guild, it's not a problem because everything dies right away. But in lesser guilds, getting those mobs stacked up can really cause some trouble and cause the healers to put out more mana than what they should be putting out and not being able to conserve it into the next phase. Even though sometimes you can drop combat in between phases, which is kind of dumb. But yeah, I would always...
Fair enough.
I would always put Curse of Recklessness, at least on the big ones.
Okay.
And if you have a Warlock one in each room to do the Curse of Recklessnesses, then the rest of the casters sit in the middle, and those Warlocks call out, okay, we have green on Throne Room, we have blue on Entrance. Okay, Warlocks go to the blue side, mages go to the green. And you just call it out that way. That way, if you sit in the middle, you have the least amount of travel time to get to the side that you're supposed to be on.
Alright, I'm checking a look at this parser right now. I'm trying to see how much was the ad. So you used the sapper, not even holy water. Okay, I was actually curious. So on this dude, you did seriously a disgusting amount of damage on this. I mean, 958 DPS on this boss. Walk us through a Neff fight, bro. Walk us through a Neff fight. I mean, all the ads come out, you deal with all the ads. Neff comes down.
Well, the ads come out right before Neff dies. They come out near the very end of the
No,
fight.
I'm saying like you did the little gauntlet event at the beginning with all the different with the wormkins coming out and stuff. You kill them all.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So for my guild, since the wormkins die pretty much right away, the best thing I can do in phase 1 is just make use of my instant cast spells and my searing pains. Since I don't have an option, I literally cannot cast a shadow bolt against the lesser mobs that spawn in phase 1. They just die too quickly.
Mm-hmm.
So I searing pain, shadow bolt, or searing pain, death coil, shadow burn, and try to keep shadow burn on cooldown.
Mm-hmm.
And if everything is dead and I'm waiting for something to spawn, then I'll use shadow ward, because Nefarian will randomly teleport around and cast shadow bolt, and that shadow bolt, if it targets you, can give you spell pushback. So if you have dead time in phase 1, you're best off just putting a shadow ward on yourself. And then as soon as you're transitioning into phase 2, you want to stand to the left of the caster team, and you want them to not stack on you. So you want to be in range, or you want to be out of range of the AoE fear, but you also want to be away from your caster team. And the reason that is because a Warlock class call will summon an Infernal down at the place that the Warlocks are standing, and there's a little micro stun that goes off. So you don't want that micro stun to interrupt a heal or anything like that. So you have your Warlock stand off to the side to not interrupt as many players as possible.
Mm-hmm.
It's basically just the way I'm positioning is that there is a bone and you stand behind and can stand a bit to the right,
Yeah.
then you won't get fear if Nefarian is not being moved. I think just on the phase 1 part, as Alive said, typically you kind of like spam your Shadow Bolt and Death Coil and tab at the same time, so you try to get it insta up. You can get in the Searing Pain on the small ones. The bigger chromatics, you do be able to Shadow Bolt on, but if your guild maybe is mid-tier, or you probably even can Shadow Bolt once in a while on the smaller ones. But this one is very hard because you need to stand very aggressive and you need to be really on point and like have a mean face on yourself, I would say, to do damage on it, and it's hard.
Mm-hmm.
I think going into phase 2, where Alive described the parts with the call, I think one part, the Warlocks are, or not the Warlocks, the what are they called now? That you spawn.
Those
The
constructs? Oh no!
Yeah, the
oh,
Infernals.
okay, yeah.
So good to know that the Infernals, those are fire immune, right, Alive?
Yep.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, so you can't Rain of Fire or Hellfire on them, or even Sapper them. So it's kind of a waste to Shadow Bolt also. Better to have the mages doing that, but that depends a bit on your guild. I think that the last part with it is that remember to do your major mana pot and your Demonic Rune or Dark Rune kind of early, because the fight is typically so long, so they will come off CD and you can use it once again. And you don't want to life tap too much. And I think also it's more of a trick for AQ and even more so for Nags, but always life tap once when you can. Like you have used your mana and you life tap so you don't get full mana, but almost full mana. And then you just do it once so you actually have some HP regeneration. Normally healers do heal you, but if maybe it's a stressed situation or your guild are a bit low or have maybe not the best performers, always try to have that you have like 80% life, 80% mana, and that you regen in them instead. That's a good way of trying to max out a bit, so you don't need to stand and do like a first aid or so. Other than that, just pump. I would say that Nefarian actually is one of the fights where it's possible to pull threat. Like it actually is.
Especially if you're Alliance.
Why is that?
Horde, you meant?
No, as Alliance, if you get a Paladin class call and it bops, then you can generate higher threat.
Oh shit! Damn, feels weird, man. Alliance talk.
But I would say at this very current part, even if you have full BWL gear, probably you cannot pull aggro. But when the Soul Group patch actually was announced that it's coming the 15th of April, so that's soon. That's it's 8 days from now. With the Bloodvine, I would say actually it's possible to pull aggro on Nefarian.
Damn.
Yeah, for certain, yeah.
So it seems like the most important thing with getting a good parse on Nefarian, man, is connecting with all these bone constructs at the exact same time. With this Sapper, the Holy Water, bro, this does 220.9 DPS. It's 23.04% of damage. I mean, of course, I knew that going into this, but you must have had a really nice connection here, right? This is...
Well, I mean, I don't ever move towards the constructs, and well, sometimes I have to move just a tiny bit, but generally speaking, we kite the constructs to a specific spot, which is usually right on the casters anyway.
Yeah.
Because you don't want the casters to move because they'll lose DPS. So you can actually life tap or do something that will put you on GCD while also Goblin Sapper charging and not moving. Or in between Shadow Bolt casts and not moving, and so on and so on. And most always you'll have a Blessing of Protection off cooldown as well. So when you know that the ads are being kited over to you, you call for Blessing of Protection. You immediately just Sapper charge them, or Holy Water, or whatever you want to use.
The thing with me, I don't know if you have a similar spot, is they die so fast that you want a juicy piece of the action that, like, you have your finger on the trigger and you're like, hold, and you wait until you get as many in there, and you don't want to pull the trigger too early, but they do die really fast, so you have to finesse it. I mean, at least with our guild, we have to move a little bit to the area where we need the Sapper. That's big brain.
Yeah, sometimes you have to move a little bit, but it's easier to manipulate where the enemies are going rather than lose your damage uptime trying to move towards the enemy. I mean, they're able to be CC'd and slowed by everything in the game. You can Frost Nova them, you can Frost Trap them, you can slow them down, everything. So it's easier for you to manipulate them and stack them up into a given pre-decided point.
Absolutely.
And I mean, those parts are, can we say, a bit cheesy and so on, but I mean, they need to die, and the faster and the better way you kill it, the better it is. But for sure, I kind of like to get the bop and do it, so I call for a bop and then Sapper. And the other way is to do it even a bit more cheesy, that you kind of wait it in so they are like 60% and then Sapper. That's kind of the same way as Core Hounds packs in Molten Core, that when you do the double pull before Magmadar, then you do a Hellfire, and then you finish it off with a Sapper charge. But, you know, does that make anything going faster, you being better, and the guild performing better? I guess it's more fun things more than maybe and log things more than actually being...
Do you guys have an opinion on Sapper versus Holy Water? I've always heard Holy Water is better because the skills are spell power, but who really has time to go get Holy Water? I guess Progress would, though, if they that's the type of guild that you would.
Holy Water's really not that bad to get because there's a lot of mages that are like boosting Strat Undead or grinding Strat Undead for gold, or you could just get a group to go do it. There's plenty of people looking to get a piece of gear off the last boss there. I would say Holy Water is really not that bad at all. There is a little bit more of a delay on it just because of the animation. But the way we do it, it's being dragged over us anyway, so it's more convenient for us to do Sapper the way we do it. But I would say that Holy Water would yield more damage output if the stars aligned and the AoE hit absolutely everything and all the mobs were stacked up perfect for it. And I would say Holy Water is better. It's just more convenient to use Sapper.
I see. So you have a little room for even improvement on this World 11 parse, man.
Well, it all depends on how we're moving the mobs. But also,
I would also say that it's extremely hard. I mean, this has been since like the first MC raid. Like for a Warlock in particular, it's super hard to get all the gear. So, for example, I have quite a lot of the PvP gear. I do have the fire gear. I mean, I can't actually get everything I want. So I'm squeezing down on the soul shards, which I would say Alive would scream at me if he saw it in reality. So, and that's just because like when we ran on private servers, I never had any fire gear, and I didn't bring PvP gear typically. But because of Firemore that we are playing on is there is a lot of threats. So in that way, I kind of feel I need to have the PvP gear. And also I have the fire gear with me, so you are screwed. So just that way, that single factor, I would say it's actually beneficial having sappers over holy water, because you will use the sappers in more occasions.
Also, something as a side note, it's kind of relevant on Nefarian, but it's going to be more relevant going forward into later raids, since the bosses are going to last longer. There's a lot of small min-maxing you can do on long duration fights where you have to life tap and constantly be reapplying multiple corruptions. I recommend that every Warlock that really wants to improve always take a VOD, maybe shadow play or whatever you want to do to take a VOD, and just look over the VOD every now and then before the next raid if you're really trying to improve and min-max. But on these long fights, you can really look into when your corruption is falling off, how far into your next shadow bolt you are, if it's worth to wait like 0.2 seconds to reapply the corruption, and fitting your life taps into that, because like Hellspawn said earlier, you don't want to go completely and then life tap 4 times, because that puts you in a dangerous position health-wise. So it's good to life tap incrementally, but at the same time, you don't want to over life tap either. Like on a boss fight like Ragnaros or Nefarian that lasts a bit longer, you don't want to life tap so much that when the boss dies, you Shadow Bolt, Death Coil, Shadow Burn, the boss dies, and you still have 40% mana. Because that means you spent GCDs on life tap that could have been spent on damage. You didn't need that excess of mana. So on long boss fights, there are very small things you can do to min-max that. Like if my corruption is falling off in 1.2 seconds and I am 9% mana, instead of casting a Shadow Bolt, it would be better off for me to life tap, because life tap is going to be a 1.5 second GCD, and corruption's falling off in 1.2 seconds. I only have 0.3 seconds of downtime when I'm already going to need to life tap anyways. And then there's a bunch of little tiny scenarios like that where normally in a very, very short fight, they wouldn't really matter. But going forward, as the boss fights last longer and longer and longer, they're going to start contributing towards your DPS more and more and more, especially when you're in Next Ramus killing KT and Sephiron. If you can determine when you should life tap, when you should reapply corruption, when you should wait on reapplying corruption, if you should cast another Shadow Bolt or life tap, if you can get experienced enough to know all of those situations, you can see incremental DPS increases the longer the fights go on.
And this one is something that even when a live does like how to parse in BWL, or when you just watch a fast speed run, or you look at the logs and you deep dive into it, this is almost, I would say, a bit beyond that, because it comes from experience. So when I'm nuking on Ragnaros, I'm always calculating, will I be able to do a Shadow Bolt, a Death Coil, and a Shadow Burn SN? If the answer is no, in my sense, I life tap. And sometimes you like, God damn it, I didn't do it right, so you don't get off the Shadow Burn. Or sometimes you end up with too much mana. I would on a guesstimate say that me and Alive probably hits, if we world buff, probably hits 95% of the finishers. But it do happens, and also it comes into when you lose your world buffs mid-run, then you actually need to adjust, because then you have a less mana pool, which really hits you that you run out of mana earlier, which requires more life taps, which changes the pace on how you life tap. So like if you don't have world buffs, probably in Nefarian you do quite a lot of double life taps. If you have world buffs, you probably do single life taps. It's like I can't almost describe this one. I think the only way you could describe it is that you in the live case, like me and Alive, we're watching his VOD, and then we talk about did we right or did we wrong or how did we think. That's the only way that we can like educate ourselves on these ones. But we are down to like the nitty gritty. But I think that here is where you can squeeze out 5 to 10% extra. Yeah. So these are about cursing or casting your curse and corrupt early, standing on the tanks and the hunter, and how you actually finishing it together with the mana. We can say control. What's it called?
Management.
Yeah, the mana management. That's probably the big difference. it's not about how hard you hit the Shadow Bolt button.
It's how you manage all of your resources. Health is a resource, mana is a resource, threat is a resource. All of it needs to be managed, and that's
you want
not
to finish with
that
0
you can
resources too. You want to dump, like just plan a way that you'll end with nothing, and you start with everything.
Exactly.
Yeah, and that's not something that you can really just blatantly go out and teach someone. It comes with experience, and the best way to get better at that is simply by just watching your own VODs. By watching your own VODs, you get a better feel of how fast your guild kills certain bosses, which will increase your performance because you know what kind of grace period you have for immunities like Blessing of Protection, Limited Vulnerability Potion. You get a better feel for that. You can go back, look at your VODs, and see exactly when your Greater Fire Protection potions are falling off on the fire damage bosses. You can see where you should life tap here, where you should corruption here, and you start noticing a lot more things, but it's something that's just going to come with experience. I've been playing only Warlock as my main in Classic on 5 different private servers, I want to say. Over 5 years I've been playing Warlock in Classic, and I still watch my VODs. Not every week, but almost every week.
So, here's an example. Like, when I was about to do my first BWL, that's 2 resets ago, I actually watched Alive's VOD just to kind of get the grip and the feeling of it again, and try to kind of take out the small things that were different from Classic. So I saw on the Razor Gore how the pattern of the Dragon Kings were. So actually, when I went in, I was able to top DPS from the get-go. And if I didn't have that insight, it would have been kind of impossible. I think also other parts, like, you know, we kind of come from a position where Warlock or Hunter are considered the worst class. I think it's good to point out that when it was not a DMF week, but still a full speedrun week, Alive did #1 DPS in several BWL runs that we had in progress on private. I think another part, I think there is one of the logs which is
top damage like overall? Out of all classes?
Top damage overall.
Wow.
Yeah, overall.
Above all the warriors, and then there were like the best warriors, I would say.
They were rank 14s as well.
Yeah, and I think that if you look at one of the screenshots I sent, I mean, I think always comparing logs is shit, but there is one called like AQ server first, rank 5 twins tanking. So this is from our very first AQ run that we did on Lightbringer, where I also was twin tanking and still were ending up on top 5. And I think one thing that is important from that log to I think it's ended up in the wrong window though.
Yeah, I'm trying to find it. Which one is it out of all these? Is it the bottom one?
It's called yeah, I think it's the bottom one. It's like AQ server first, rank 5. Right. So this is from a super old stat system called Realm Players. I think Legacy Players, and it's actually, I think this one was pretty good, but I'm not sure if it's like how accurate it is. Today's logs are more accurate.
Trying to find it, brother. Which one from the there's the very top one that you sent.
Give me 1 second. Sorry for it. I'm just trying to point out that like how good actually Warlocks are. So it's the very last one.
Oh, the very last one at the very bottom with the damage healing total only bosses. Okay. Let me pull it up.
And just pointing out that like in this screenshot, which can be good to know, is that the mages do have ignite. So that's why the #1 mage just is way above everything else. But if you normalize the ignite and spread it out to all the mages, if I don't recall it wrong, the mage that is #6 was like the average of it. So you can actually see that in AQ server first, with twins tanking, meaning that the Warlock is tanking and it's not doing a lot of damage on that fight, Warlocks actually came out third and not too far after the 2 top DPSers. And you can see this was like when Sulp was in his prime and Tetsu, and I mean,
and it's
I haven't done a. Yeah, it's me. That's
it's
also
you.
Also, I would say.
Also, keep in mind. Yeah. Keep in mind that we are not. This was server first, and on this specific server, that you could not raid with world buffs for the first month. And Warlocks are very, very dependent on world buffs because of the improved Shadow Bolt debuff uptime. So this is also without world buffs. If you're playing AQ40 100% optimally, and you have equal levels of gear to everyone else, you should be able to beat all of the mages on trash plus boss damage. The only mage that you're not going to beat is the mage that has the majority hold on Ignite, because Ignite is just such an absurd mechanic that no one can beat it.
Damn.
Yeah, so what you normally do is that you take all the mages' Ignite damage, and then you equalize it out so everyone gets the same portion, because it's not one mage is not better than the other one just because he got the Ignite first, so to speak. That's a random mechanic basically. So that's normally how you like equalize it out. But I mean, I don't say that this one is maybe representative, but it's always good on these very first runs because everyone is trying to perform to the best, and that this gives some indications of the strength of the classes. So I mean, we have good times ahead for us for the Warlocks, and
we get stronger. We're like a fine wine. We age.
Yeah,
age
and
well.
Actually, Nax is even more crazy. So I mean, to kind of round it off on this, kind of Warlocks is fantastic in the future. So in our server first Naxxramas on Hagen, we had a really bad start. So our tank misparried, and 2 I think melee DPS got aggro. I didn't do anything for 20 seconds, and I did 3 Shadow Bolts, and I got aggro and wiped us, and almost cost us the race. That kind of shows that you go from 0 to like 1000 DPS in 3 casts.
Yeah.
Which
honestly,
is just, like unheard of. You know, like no other class can do that.
Warlocks in general, they are a really strong class. It's just the way that we raid in Molten Core and Blackwing Lair that gimp them. Like Veilistraz trash, for example. Most guilds, you just stack it up. And if you're stacking things up, you're not going to be able to out DPS a rank 14 warrior cleaving. You're not going to be able to out DPS a mage doing AoE damage. You're not going to be able to. But that's how we raid Molten Core. That's how we raid Blackwing Lair. And if you look at the fights that are not short burst AoE fights, Warlock starts to pull ahead. In single target fights, again, we would have to pull up some private server logs, but if you have Bloodvine gear, and you start to get a little bit of Blackwing Lair gear, you get Bloodvine gear, you have your tier, then Warlocks can be at the top of the DPS meters. The only things that are actually bringing them down on the overall damage meters for the whole raid are those situations where you're doing AoE. Because in Suppression Room, mages are going to Arcane Explosion and pump the meters a little bit. Warriors are going to be able to cleave the AoE fights, and they're going to climb ahead. But it doesn't mean that Warlock is a bad class. Warlock actually, with ZG gear, full world buffs, Blackwing Lair gear, can be one of the top damage dealers. The only issue is we're very, very weak on AoE. And the reason why we get better going into AQ40 and Naxxramas, obviously we get better because of gear. Warlocks are very, very dependent on stats. But not only gear, but the way that we do the raid changes, and it changes in a way that is better for Warlocks. So kind of like what I was saying before, some of the trash mobs in AQ40, such as the Flayers and the trash mobs after the Twins, you can't stack them up because they have effects when they die, or they have a Mind Flay, or they have a Fear. They have different effects that allows you to... You're not allowed to stack them up and cleave them down. You're not allowed to stack them up in Cone of Cold and Arcane Explosion. So the fact that you have to spread them out allows Warlock's toolkit to shine. You're allowed to multi-dot. You're allowed to do the things that Warlocks want to do, and not the things that mages and warriors want to do. So it's not necessarily that Warlocks as a class are bad. It's just the way that we raid early raids in Classic WoW aren't befitting of a Warlock's toolkit.
Well said, man. Well said.
Yeah, and we said it extremely early in the talk, but also adding up on top of that is that the first 2 Warlocks typically will always do the most damage because of Curse of Recklessness added. Without that, it's just the most damage. We're talking about like a 800 to 1000 DPS that you can actually add to the log, if you could. And then Curse of Elements will be if you have like 4 mages or more. The third Warlock would always be a bit questionable, but actually Warlock 4, who should be your, like position 4 should be your best Warlock. If that Warlock is doing more damage than most of your other players, then that player is just better to pick to have that 4th Warlock. And then adding a 5th or a 6th is all dependent if you can have corruption slots and of the quality of it. I would say that unfortunately, the majority of the Warlocks are not trying to push enough. Like they are kind of like back sitting and thinking, yeah, I'm kind of worthless or I'm not doing so good. But I think that Warlocks need to be ultra aggressive, ultra
I agree.
how to say, focused and trying to really push, because like if you're min-maxing to the biggest ability, you actually have possibilities of being a
thing
top
is, if you're
DPSer.
min-maxing with the Warlock, you're basically flirting with death, like more so than any other class.
Exactly.
You know, so
You're dancing with the devil.
the incentive for most like just normal gamers and stuff is that the downside of going a little bit too hard is like the risk is so high, right? Like your whole guild will yell at you and you become a meme, and like they'll be like stupid Warlock.
I feel like that's kind of why a lot of Warlocks don't go too hard, because as a Warlock, if you're pumping as hard as you can and you're really trying to parse, then you're playing on the edge, because you're popping limited and vulnerability potions so you can go way over the threat table. You're doing this, you're doing that, you're playing life on the edge. If you do one thing wrong or time it wrong, you could not only kill yourself, but you could kill others. So I feel like a lot of players are so afraid of mistiming and misplaying, and they have a fear of doing something bad and getting yelled at or getting someone killed, that they choose to just not go super hard 100%. And choose the safe route.
Yep.
But I can't do that.
And I would say, like, for sure, melee is benefiting the most from world buffs and getting all consumables. But actually, just because of how Ruin is working and the multiplier of PI, Nightfall, TOEP / Hero Charm, actually, I would say that if you think that your Warlock is doing good, try one day, one raid to get all the world buffs, do your flask, get all the Shadow power, the Arcane power, the Fire power. Like, you need to have Fire power too, because of the vulnerabilities in AoE. Try to do those parts and just see where you end up with trying to go completely crazy on the DPS. Because for sure, Warlock is like the most satisfying playing on the highest level when you see those big crits.
Also,
but doing the big crits is not what will make you being a good raider, because you need to mid-max on the way of how you open it up with the curses, the corruptions, the finishing with Death Coil, Shadowburn, the mana usage, and everything else that we talked about the last couple of hours.
Gotcha. Well, that's it, ladies and gentlemen. That's our Blackwing Lair Masterclass right there. That was a colossal amount of information shared in a short period of time. My brain hurts right now. I really can't thank these guys enough, yo. Can we get some cheese and rice in the chat, some emotes in the chat, round of applause for everybody. We need to pay them back a little bit for their efforts, though, guys. If you guys are all here, we need to follow them, support them, Twitter, Twitch, YouTube. Make it worth their time for being here today and sharing all this information with everybody. I'm linking a live stream right now. If you want to support the channel, best way you can do it is by making it worth the guest time, guys. Please go drop them a follow or a sub or whatever you can do.
If you wouldn't mind, could I link my YouTube video?
Absolutely.
Or my YouTube as well?
Link away,
I have a new
please.
video coming out tomorrow.
Hellspawn, do you have a Twitch, YouTube? If not, you should, bro. Big brain.
No, I don't. I haven't used YouTube too much, but I do streams occasionally. I can put it here in the Discord.
Perfect,
you can link
perfect.
it wherever you are. I mean, I primarily streamed when we went for World First Molten Core, and I pushed really hard on that one, but we came second to Apes, so that sucked. And hopefully I will start raiding again a bit more frequently on the Warlock.
Also,
I mean, I love Warlock.
I do have something top secret coming out when AQ40 is closer. There's something that I'd really like to test out. So make sure you guys stay tuned. Kargaz, I'll keep you updated on the information as well.
Please do.
But when AQ40 comes out, we have a special spec that only works in AQ40 and no other raid. And it's a spec that I guarantee none of you Warlocks have ever used in raiding.
Is it MD Ruin or something?
It's not Master Demonologist.
Right.
I would say this. I actually told Alive that I'm not sure if you're trolling or not right now. So that's the level of it.
Even I've known Hellspawn for years, and even he wasn't sure if I was being serious or not. But it's a legitimate spec, but the conditions, you have to have very specific conditions to make it work.
Okay.
That's all I'm going to say.
All right. Well, we'll stay tuned for that. Here's Dive's YouTube. Not Dive. Dive's in the chat. Good to see that. This is Alive's YouTube as well. Guys, please, especially with Hellspawn, because he's just streaming infrequently, let's get him some subs and followers so he gets a base, man, so he can start streaming, guys. Hell, that's important. You want to stream to just yourself, man. And so I dropped it in the chat. Please, just take this time. Take this 2 seconds just to give him a follow or a sub or something like that. Thank you very much for the $2, B Stoker, and all the subs and donations and primes and all that throughout the stream. Sorry I wasn't able to shout each and every one of them out, but it is sincerely appreciated. Guys, do you have any closing thoughts for the people? Any shout-outs or anything like that?
No shout-outs at all. I would just say don't be afraid to really push things to the edge if you really want to be someone who parses. And also, never be afraid to seek out information or ask questions. I don't stream as often as I should, but if you do catch me streaming, don't be afraid to ever ask any questions, or you can PM me on Discord. I personally love playing Warlock. I love playing Classic WoW, and you would never ever bother me with any questions. Sometimes on Discord I can't answer right away, but if you join in on one of my streams, you can ask me 100 questions, and it doesn't bother me one bit.
Yeah, I mean, for my part, I think going with questions to Alive is super good. That's what I normally do. I think that sometimes we share opinions, sometimes we have different opinions, so no problem to ask me also if you see me streaming or on Discord or whatever. I think I'm also on Alive's Discord. I would say, other than that I hope from DreamHack's point of view that actually we can do some cool stuff with WoW in the future and Classic, but I don't dare to promise anything, but maybe there are good opportunities with it. Other than that, I think we combined as Warlocks just need to get a bit more proud and start pumping. I think it would have been super fun if we could have had Exen from Apes right now, because he had done some really, really crazy logs, and there are many other good Warlocks out there. So I don't think that me or Alive or any other from Progress in particular is way above everyone else, but I think that maybe Alive has contributed with a lot of the good insights, and I do think that if you only stare on these boss logs, I think you're doing it a bit wrong, or you're checking like the world first that Alive did with Progress, that his log was not good. Well, that's how it will be if we cannot be playing in position 4, meaning not having curse assignment and having corruption. And I'm very sure that we will see this crazy performance from a lot of the Warlocks going forward. So,
yeah, looking at parses will not always accurately tell you which is the best Warlock, because again, like we said, XN, I know XN. He's a Warlock in Apes. I've played with him. I talked to him. He's a good Warlock for sure. But the way Apes is structured, they play with 4, 5, 6 Warlocks. They focus a lot of their gear towards Warlocks. They gave their Talismans of Inferior Power to Warlocks Prio. So, not to say XN is bad. XN is a great Warlock player. However, a lot of the parses will not reflect a player's skill wholeheartedly, because it also depends on how they're structuring their raid, how they're distributing loot, if they have a good Shadow Weaving Priest, if they have a bad one, how many PIs someone's getting. You don't always know the situation of the raid. So don't always try to compare yourself to someone else's log. If you're trying to improve as a Warlock, don't aim to be as good as someone else. Just aim to improve yourself, and the damage will follow.
Hell yeah. Guys, thank you so much for your time and being here. I really, really sincerely appreciate it. And for those of you guys watching right now, we're going to be doing ZG World First coverage. We did BWL World First coverage, watching these guys in action. They just announced it on the 15th, so that's in 1 week's time. It seems like a good amount of people that might be watching right now might be interested in that type of content, so that's why I say it. But this will be a VOD up on my YouTube channel, so you can go back and rewatch any part. I'll try to add some timestamps to it and all that. Thank you very much for your time, ladies and gentlemen, tuning in. Thank you, Hellspawn. Thank you, Alive. You guys are the best, man. And
fun. So it's gonna be controversial, I think, on who gets what.
Zul'Gurub is definitely going to be a spicy World First race. So if you guys are tuning in for the World First race, definitely you don't want to miss the Zul'Gurub run. Trust me, I know it's just a 20-man instance, but I've seen the strategies behind the scenes. You're gonna want to watch it. You're gonna want.
Hell yeah, we'll see. Well, TBD. But thank you guys. Wash your hands, stay safe, stay corona free, socially distance, play WoW.